Balanced Luck, Book 8 of the Twisted Luck series. Written by Mel Todd. Narrated by Autumn Juliet. Chapter 1. There have been more rips opening. Creatures are poking out or escaping. What is the government going to do to protect us? Are we just supposed to accept this as normal? Editorial letters. The revelations in the council had not really changed anything. The next council meeting was set up for 2 days later. I'd spent my time talking to Joe and Sable and making sure they were safe. We were accelerating getting them into the Tudor house, but it wasn't going to be overnight. I walked into the council meeting in what I'd started to think of as my war gear. Caroline decided to wear the harness, and instead asked me to load it with treats, shears, and all manner of things. I didn't understand why he'd had this change of heart. I also couldn't figure out why he didn't clank when he patted behind me. Most of my questions disappeared as he sat there talking to someone and pulled a treat out of one bag, then pulled a file out of another small pouch, and the being's eyes, and Arala's in this case, widened. Caroline started pointing out things in the other bags, especially his bowl. "Is he showing off his harness?" Citlali asked me from her chair. I'd left the chair of swords. It amused me, and Citlali hadn't asked me to change it. The symbolism might be missed by some of the denizens, but for me, it served as a reminder. This wasn't for fun. "Yes," I said, watching the interaction and how more and more of the non-humanoid denizens were inching closer. He asked me this morning, but wouldn't say why his attitude had changed, and knowing the Catholic I do, I suspect there is something else besides the obvious going on. Citlali and I watched for a long time. There was still time before the meeting was scheduled to start, and Shay had not shown up, though I expected him shortly. Dolly and Scott were coming with him, and while Dolly seemed more straightforward than most familiars, she, like most of them, could open a rip to her realm. "Kessis," Citlali said suddenly, her eyes still on Caroline. "Do you want a harness?" Kessis, who'd been busy making sure her smoky gray fur was perfect, flicked an ear in the direction where Caroline was holding court. "I would not be opposed to something simpler," she finally said, though she refused to actually look at him. "Why do you never ask for one before?" I ducked my head, expecting the answer about to come, and I didn't want to make either of them feel like I was laughing at them.
"You never offered. Also, the ones I had seen always were things to control the animal. His provides him options. The thumbs are helpful, but lacking them can be overcome."
The disdain on thumbs had me fighting back a snort of laughter. It was the same disdain Jazz had used when she really wanted something, but didn't want to let anyone know. Citlali fell silent. I went back to watching the political drama around us. People rippled and flowed in and around, with a heated atmosphere that I knew I was at the center of. The number of glances, glares, and smirks in my direction made that clear. I should probably go mingle and get my opinions and needs clearly set, but it seemed like too much effort. Right now, I wanted to see what would happen. More than one denizen looked like they were about to start our way, then would glance at me in Citlali's chair and veer away. Or, even more interestingly, go to talk to Caroline. The constant opening of portals was a constant background pain, making me ignore the comings and goings completely. "Morning, Cori," Shay said right behind me, and I flinched. I'd been too focused on the drama around us and forgot to keep an eye out for him. I pushed my immediate fight response down. And when had that become my first reaction? And smiled at him, Scott, and Dolly. "Morning. You ready for this?" Shay snorted as he pulled out his travel mug and settled into the chair that waited for him.
If I knew what this was, maybe. As it is, I've got bets as to what happens today.
Oh? I raised a brow. Care to enlighten me?
Nope. 'Cause you'll change the circumstances if you know. Just be you.
He smirked at me, and I narrowed my eyes at him, not impressed. Should I be worried?
No. I just have ideas as to what I think will happen and have a bet with Scott about it.
He said with a dismissive wave.
Nothing major.
I looked over at Scott, who stood between Shay and the sword chair. And what is the bet for?
Who cooks dinner tonight?
Scott said with a laugh.
Personally, I hope he loses, as his Japanese-American fusion dishes are delicious.
I blinked, looking at the two of them. You live with him now? I knew it wasn't my business, but Scott was so much bigger than life that the question slipped out.
Short-term stay with he and Sloane. They are just too cute, and it amuses me to be a foil. But I'm not good at staying in one place too long. Once this whole thing is done, Dolly and I will probably get back on the road.
The words bounced in my head. Wait, Shay, you and Sloane are a couple? Shay looked at me, brow raised.
Yes, and?
My mouth opened and closed, and I thought back to when I'd worked in the coffee shop. I'd seen him with more than one female date. But then there was Sloane. Their behavior at Sloane's house. Huh. I mean, nothing. I like Sloane. It just surprises me. Shay shrugged.
He makes me happy, and for some reason he doesn't hate me. I'm not going to complain.
That made me giggle and feel like I was 19 again. Then, yep, you should stay with him. I would have strangled you. Scott laughed, and I thought he was about to say something when a piercing whistle cut through the air in my brain. Who knew you could whistle in mind speak? Once I'd quit wincing in pain, I searched for the maker of the sound, even as everyone else fell silent and did the same thing, at least judging from rotating heads. It didn't take long to figure out as Tursane stood in the middle of the circle, her head held high, and Snake slicked back into an undulating braid. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she just waited until most of the room had gone silent. She spoke aloud, but the same words were a soft echo in my mind. It felt odd.
As there is no chair, there is no ability to call council to order. As we are trying to figure this out, all visitors be aware you have a voice as inhabitants of the realms. We seek nominations for the title of chair.
She waited in the middle of the ring. I scanned and noted groups of beings focused around central figures. Those had to be the groups that were going to nominate someone. I was proved correct in the next few seconds.
I nominate Tursane.
I nominate Charissa.
From the way the name was pronounced, I was pretty sure the Naga had nominated herself.
I nominate Jorgas.
I nominate Freya. I nominate Smog.
That voice I recognized, and shot a glance at Smog, who was glaring at Onyx lying next to her. I fought down a snicker.
I nominate Cori Munroe.
My spine went rigid at that comment, and I tried to place who said it, but there were too many moving beings to even have an idea of the culprit. Everyone fell silent after that, and I sighed. It really shouldn't have surprised me. It still did. I hoped that Salstra didn't pull any of her favors to the forefront. After a minute, Tursane spoke into the silence.
We have Tursane, Charissa, Jorgas, Freya, Smog, and Cori Munroe. Are there any others?
Again, there was silence, though I heard lots of low-level mutters and the hum of communication in my mind that told me conversations were going on all around me.
Very well. Let me hear seconds.
All of us but Charissa received a second, but that didn't narrow the field down much.
Next step. Jorgas, Are you willing to serve as a chair?
I had no idea what the flow for this was, but just the fact that I got asked made me feel better. The crowd parted to show Georgas, his feathers alive with flickering flames, sitting on a perch. For the first time, I saw multiple other phoenixes with him. Given Brix's story, it meant they were all under a few thousand years old, but it gave me a sense of hope that there were more than just two. There was one in all the colors of blue, from a white blue to a black. Another had browns, but when the feathers moved, I could see designs in iridescent blues and purples on the feathers. Yet another reminded me of cotton candy, all pastels and puffy as if it was so young its feathers hadn't completed coming in. Georgas turned his head to the others, and there was a sense of communication between them. Then he faced Tersane.
I do not believe I best serve the realms by being chair. I decline the opportunity.
If there was emotion in his voice, I couldn't read it. It just sounded like he was talking, not that something important was being decided. Tersane nodded.
Zmog, are you willing to serve as chair?
Scorched ashes? No. I'd rather be thrown into the void than deal with you bunch of airbrains.
Zmog's response was fast and hard, though I heard others besides me laughing. I found it hilarious that she attended most of the meetings, but had no desire to be involved. Or maybe I didn't. Being an observer to all of this would be much more palatable than being in the middle of it. Tersane retained her implacable facade.
Freya?
There was a long sigh, and a Valkyrie stepped forward. She was much older than Frey, though her skin was mostly wrinkle-free. She had eyes that screamed her age, centuries, not decades. Her wings were white where they joined to her body, but went from that to all the ranges of gray to a black that called to the emptiness of the void. Her hair was the same type as Frey's, but it too had paled into a silver that almost outshined her armor.
I will serve if elected.
Tersane nodded.
I too will serve if elected.
She pivoted to look at me.
Cori Munroe, will you serve?
It took everything I had to not respond with an immediate, fuck no. But instead, I shook my head. I do not believe being chair is the best use of my abilities. Tersane didn't smile, but her snakes bobbed at me, laughing.
Then the contenders are Tersane of spirit and Freya of order.
At her words, Freya moved out to stand next to her.
All beings of the realms have the opportunity to vote.
Behind her, out of the ground, rose two urns. One was covered with drawings or etchings of snakes, while the other was covered with similar designs of feathers. Next to them, a large open bowl of pebbles appeared.
Put a pebble in the one you desire to have as your new chair.
With those words, Tersane turned to talk to Frey in low tones, and beans began to move toward the pebbles.
Well, I don't have to cook tonight,
Shay said with a grin in his voice. I turned to look at him. You bet they'd try to make me chair?
Yep. No, I didn't figure you'd take it, but I knew you'd be suggested.
He looked around at the beans moving to vote.
I have to say I'd rather like their way of doing it. No speeches, fast and simple. It can take weeks or more for us to elect a majority chair in our political system. This speeds it up. Though I suppose it would be easy enough to cheat and win. Just have all your followers pick up 2 pebbles.
I snorted. I bet you can't, but I wouldn't suggest trying. Who do you wish us to vote for? Citlali asked, and I turned to her, my brow furrowed. Why are you asking me? You get to vote the way you want to vote. The idea of telling people how to vote made my skin crawl, but there was also the fact that I had no idea whom to vote for. Because you know the players better than I do, and you might have a feel as to whom would be the best in this situation, she said, watching the beans drop pebbles in, then move away. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were tricking me because it looked like one urn was higher than the other. You've met Tursane. I've never met Freya, and other than her being named after a god from Norse mythology, I couldn't tell you much. But you need to vote your conscience, and who you believe would be best in that role. I rose, partially to avoid the conversation, partially to vote, but mostly because way too many beans seemed interested in my answer. There was an odd amount of space around me as I went through the line to get my pebble. Right before I got there, Caroline joined me and reached up to grab a polished stone as well. You can vote in this? I asked, surprised, though Tursane had said all beings.
Any member of the realms that wishes to may, but they must come here. This will very probably take a few hours, as until more than 15 minutes has passed without a vote, it isn't closed. He was nonchalant as he dropped his vote in Tursane's urn. I noticed they were actually placed on scales, and you could see which was winning by how they balanced. For a minute, I was amazed, but it occurred to me transforming stones to be exactly the same wasn't that hard, and it made it easy to tell the leader. Aware of too many eyes on me, I dropped my vote in Freya's urn, then walked away. They had been close to equal when I went up with Tursane in a slight lead. I didn't look back as I sank down in my chair. Citlali and Shay had gone up, though Scott and Dolly stood there. You two both get to vote also, I said with a small prompt from Caroline.
We do?
He seemed surprised. You're here. You get to vote. Technically, I could go grab anyone from Earth I wanted to, and they could vote. Not worth it in this case, but it is interesting. If you care enough to come vote, you can. Scott looked down at the big beast by his side.
You want to vote, Dolly?
Yes, Dolly, vote.
They headed to vote, and I sat there and waited for the outcome, wondering what would change. Chapter 2. If you get an offer to go to the Library of Magic, take it. As far as I can figure out, Shay and Munroe are controlling access, but I have been there. It will blow your mind. If you are researching anything prior to the spread of Christianity, this is the place to go. They even have a room devoted to what was lost in the burning of the Alexandrian Library. Anonymous on the Emrys website. Caroline was correct about the time. We had beings wander over, talk to us, leave. Esmir hung out for a while. Even Salstra wandered over as she and Esmir could exchange insults. Only Tursane and Freya were not social, nor did they vote. I sent Caroline back to Earth to get food for us. Being a bit bitchy, I had him get pizza and lots of other stuff. I had no issue with bribes or other offers to help sway opinions. When it was ready, Scott stepped into the rip to pick them up from the house. He also brought back fresh drinks for us, which improved my mood greatly. I needed some caffeine, and no matter what I did, I couldn't magic up good-tasting coffee or Coke. Water, yes. Anything else? Not really. We sat there in the council chambers, filling it with the scent of cheese, tomato sauce, fresh baked bread, and meat. We had most of the chamber's attention while we ate, and when I set back a basket of pepperoni bites offering them to anyone who wanted them, a fist fight almost broke out. I was very clear about the meat, tomatoes, and wheat it was created with. Though from what I'd been able to discern about most denizens, they had food preferences, not real restrictions. Salstra had declared them intriguing, giving me a hint as to what to bring next time to purchase her favor. That stopped me, and I tried to remember if there were any herbivores that I had seen as a denizen, and not just an animal. Before I could figure out the answer, a bell chimed.
A decision has been made. Freya is the new chair,"
Tursane announced in clear tones. It was easy to see that the urn covered with wings was slightly lower than the one with hers. I let loose a silent sigh of relief. With that, Tursane slithered back to her normal position in the ring of spirit as moderate applause and cheers rippled through the room. Freya stood there for a minute, then spread her wings wide. "I, Freya Odin-daughter, accept the position of chair for the Council of the Realms and all the duties that come with it." I could feel the pulse of magic, and I saw a bracelet appear on her left arm. My mind flashed on something I'd never connected before, the ring Brix had worn on his right talon. A hush fell as all eyes were on the woman, and I watched just as closely. I knew nothing about her, so I had no idea if she was friendly or not to humans, and me in particular. "I call this council to order. Please, clear the chambers." Her words rang with power, but I could hear the sound of another language. Tursane had mentioned once that in the council chambers, you always heard your mother tongue, but most denizens could speak at least one earth language. Otherwise, they would mind speak. But here, it was always in your language. A nice bit of magic I wish I could figure out. The effect probably involved transform and air, or maybe telepathy? The huge group faded away, some to the upper gallery, but others just left, sidestepping into wherever they had come from. I settled down and kept my eyes on the new head honcho. Maybe now things would change. Freya stood, eyes sweeping around, and nodded when the only people down here were the lords and their advisors. Bane Jarl had showed up in the last hour, well aware of how long this took. He wasn't a fan of the pepperoni bites, but enjoyed the spinach and feta breadsticks. "The primary issue on the agenda, as far as I know it, are the rips from our realms to Earth, and the danger Earth Lord Cori has stated is present from humans." I almost choked on my soda. She'd managed to imply I was lying without saying it. I was impressed and offended at the same time. "Does anyone have anything to offer?" She looked around, waiting.
"I say the Herald of Magic should be required to put forth her full effort to stopping the loss of magic before any more damage is done."
Salastra again. But what was her game? I responded while still sitting in my lush chair. "I have no issue doing that. If someone would tell me what effort should be put forth. I am the one who found the Library of Magic, and we are getting ready to work on the information that is in there. But without any database or knowledge of what I'm looking for, it might take a while." Freya nodded. "The full resources of the council are here at your disposal. How shall we assist you?" I didn't bother to repress my snort. And what resources are those? Because prior to this, the amount of assistance I've received has been minimal. I was the one that found the Library of Magic, and we're trying to get information from there. I just haven't had time yet. Freya cleared her throat. "I admit, the resources we have are better focused on dealing damage, or even destroying things than finding information lost centuries ago. However, the Valkyries and Order will not be seen as neglectful in this situation." There was a sharpness to her tone now. "The scrolls and Adas of the Valkyries are open to your perusal, and I will offer up Frey to act as your liaison." Frey glared at me, then rolled her eyes. It looked like someone was being punished for not helping sooner. I suspected bringing some mead would help with that. While I could piss everyone off and force them, being nice was much less effort.
"Spirit has been searching, but what records we have are all in memory stones, and while those are available to the Herald, We are still reviewing them to see if any would have information to assist in this area.
Tersane's words didn't surprise me. She'd let me know all memory stones in Spirit were being rounded up, and she had a few others capable of working them. We're going through them to see if there were anything on them that might be helpful, but it took a while to dig through. You couldn't assume one about weaving baskets didn't have something important later in the memory. Esmir yawned, her sharp teeth catching the light in odd ways. Chaos looks, but other than some songs, most of our history is not recorded. The only possibility is bits of chaos that have existed since the primordial times, but they must be addressed individually, and it is not. She paused for a moment, searching for a word. Expedient or comfortable even for those of chaos. Those last words surprised me. Esmir had mentioned Bob was trying to help, but the word comfortable didn't make sense. Freya turned her gaze to me, and I sighed, marshaling my argument. You know what we are doing. All I can say is keep looking, because regardless of what Brix or the Council believes, if I can't do it, your price will be higher than Earth's. Freya tilted her head. Would you explain that? I do not understand why you say that. You mentioned the weapons, and they could do great amounts of damage. But why would we be at more risk? I heard Shay snort behind me, and I tried to figure out how to explain this. May I? Citlali asked. I sagged in relief and waved at her to continue. She turned to gaze to Smog and Onyx laying in the clearing, watching through the torn-down wall. Smog, you're a mighty dragon. Are there many dragons or even other creatures mightier than you? Smog sat up a bit, preening. Not many. My mate, of course. There are a few great dragons that slumber that might be able to best me in battle. Otherwise, I would say only Bob or the deep ones. She had a bit of arrogance in her response, but overall it was actually well thought out. It also verified to me exactly where she was in the dragon hierarchy. How many humans do you think you could kill in 5 minutes? Citlali asked, her voice idle, but she pulled out her phone. That confused me, as there was no signal here at all. Humans? At least 100, I would think. Smog sounded confused by the question, which matched my own feelings. And how many denizens exist that you think could match you or even half of that? A wisp of smoke trailed up from Smog's nostril. Maybe 1,000, 2 at most. For those that are much less powerful than me, maybe 10 or 20,000? This was said slowly, and with a bit of fumbling with those numbers. I still just watched Citlali, trying to figure out the plan. Okay, let me suppose your numbers are low, and in fact there are 100,000 beings that are as mighty as you and could kill 100 humans in 5 minutes. I wanted to interrupt and mention guns, knives, grenades, all the other weapons humans had, but I kept my mouth shut and let Citlali run with it. I doubt there are that many with my level of power, but if you say so. Smog's attention was firmly locked on Citlali, as was most of the chamber. Then 100 people each for over 100,000 denizens. Citlali prompted. Smog grunted in acceptance, giving Citlali time to type on her phone. That would be 10 million people that would die if they attacked, or 10 million to destroy all the very powerful denizens. The chamber seemed to agree in principle, and I saw where she was going. That seems like a lot, but as Tersane found out, to her surprise, Earth has over 7 billion people. That means for every one of you that are as powerful as Smog, we have over 70 million people. Even if you could kill 1,000 humans before you fell, we would still crush you." The chamber had fallen silent as everyone registered that.
"Then there are our weapons," Shay contributed. "We have guns that can put a metal bullet through inch-thick steel hundreds of yards away. People can get these and use them, and that is assuming none of us are mages. And there are a lot of us who are very, very capable of killing. We just don't."
The hush that fell over the chamber turned my insides cold, and I suspect I wasn't the only one. "I see." Freya cleared her throat. "Does anyone else have anything to say?" Freya waited a minute, then continued. "If you find anything that is of assistance with these rips, I advise for all our sakes to get the information to the Earth Lords as quickly as possible." She looked around to make sure her message was understood. "Then I call this meeting to a close." There was an odd burst of sound after she said that, as if everyone exhaled in relief that nothing more had happened. Beings came streaming from the gallery, and the chatter from so many made the chamber feel like it had shrunk. "I'm going to go talk to Freya. Can you go talk to Chaos? Just be careful asking Bob things. It won't talk if you don't ask direct questions. I take that as a kindness." They nodded. Bob just made human minds bleed. I headed toward order. Freya was an unknown quantity, and I wanted to see where she fell with the whole Herald crap. "Cori?" Tersane's voice caught my attention, and I pivoted to go talk to her for a minute. "Hey, Tersane, you glad you didn't get selected?"
"Rather. The chair position has never interested me. I prefer to run my domain and make sure my charges are safe and as happy as possible within the limits of their own efforts."
I nodded. The conversation between Tersane and Marisol regarding social responsibility and the differing types of governance had been enlightening. "I get that. To be honest," I said with a touch of guilt, "that was kind of why I didn't vote for you. I didn't want to lose my friend Tersane when I had to deal with the chair Tersane." Her smile widened.
"Ah, that explains much. Many wondered about your choice, and it influenced many in how they voted."
I cringed. "Sorry."
"Do not be. That is the nature of the game. The weak follow the powerful."
"Ugh, I know, but still. So, what's up?" I really did want to talk to Freya, and I could show up to talk to Tersane really at almost any time.
"I have been thinking about the issue we are facing."
Tersane started, her voice more serious than I'd ever heard. But what really had me worried were her snakes. They were in a bun at the back of her skull, hiding from me, from everyone. They'd never done that before. "Did you come up with something?" I couldn't imagine what option she'd discovered to cause her snakes to hide.
"I believe so. I think it would be best if you killed me."
Chapter 3. The emergency broadcast system will start issuing alerts for rips in the zip codes they occur. Make sure your smartphones and your car are set to display alerts from the EBS system. Your life and the lives of those you love may depend on it. EBS PSA. Her words acted like a wave of silence that rippled through the chamber, the silence becoming an effect that spread out until the sound had died away and everyone stared at us. "What?" I managed not to screech the word, but my voice cracked, forcing it out. Caroline was at my side, and I buried my hand in his fur, seeking reassurance.
"I have gone over the options many times. I am unable to shut off this power funnel I created, and the realms are falling apart. risking all our lives. It seems to me if I am dead, then there will no longer be an issue."
Her voice sounded calm and serene, but her snakes told me she wasn't so relaxed about the option. I knew I didn't do well when I was surprised or upset. I knew I should probably walk away and think about this. I knew all of it, and I couldn't stop my mouth. Why would you ask me that? Why not ask someone else to kill you or even kill yourself? I wanted to cry and scream. The idea of killing her, of killing a friend, was like all of my worst nightmares coming together. I'd always been worried about accidentally killing someone, but to do it on purpose and to a friend, it would be a repeat of Stevie all over again, but this time with intent. All the pizza we'd eaten threatened to return.
I thought about killing myself. Salastra and I discussed that option, but I fear the risk is too great. If I died by any other means than that of the Herald, magic may still just funnel without any control. But the odds are greater that if you were the one to end my life, then magic would take that as an end to our agreement.
The weight of everyone's attention was like a smothering blanket. I found myself frozen in place, even down to the fact that I struggled to breathe. Being attacked would have been a blessing compared to this. Fighting the entire council would have been easier.
Cori, it really is the best option. I have sisters and others in spirit that can act as the realm's central leader.
She sounded like she was trying to reassure me. The words managed to crack the ice that locked me in place. "And if you're wrong?" I finally managed to squeak out, each word forced past a throat so tight I could barely inhale. "If you are wrong, and I kill a friend, and it doesn't change..." She shrugged.
"Then we tried, and you keep on going. But if it works, then the problem is solved. The realms will go back as before."
"No." My voice was hard and flat. "If you presented me with any level of proof, any examples where this had worked, I might have possibly considered it. But this? An idea? No!" I bit out each word, fighting to keep from vomiting as I did. "I will never do it if it is a random possibility. I'll die first." I looked around the chamber, and the number of beings watching me with disapproval on their faces, as if they thought I should do what she asked, hit me like a whip. "No," I managed to say one more time, and then I sidestepped home, running away from the attention, the looks, running to my safe space. Hamadia's warmth wrapped around me as I stood in the house, panting with stress and nausea. It was too quiet. The kids were with Marisol, while Joe and Sable finished the house. Already things had started being moved over, and the lack of things was another knife across my heart. I couldn't stand there. I had to know. I burst out the front door at a run, racing to the Tudor house down the street. It wasn't a long walk, maybe 10 minutes at a light stroll. I ran, and it took forever. The door was open, and I raced in. "Joe!" My voice was a scream of need and emotions that threatened to destroy me. I had to know she was okay. I needed her. Sable. I'd go to the kids in a minute. "Cori?" Joe stuck her head over the railing to look at me. "What's wrong?" The years of love, support, just being my family had erased any walls or need to pretend to be strong. I raced up the stairs and threw myself at her. Joe's arms wrapped around me, still strong, still my rock, and I shattered in her arms. "Cori, what happened?" She sank to the ground, pulling me softly wrapped in her arms. I felt Caroline appear next to me, his heat and purrs filling the area. A minute later, Sable appeared. "Joe? Cori?" Her voice sounded confused and worried. but I couldn't stop crying. Images of me plunging a knife into Tursane, or worse, just killing her and watching her drop dead. The idea of people cheering, thinking her sacrifice made everything okay, was almost worse. I panted with the effort to not vomit, even as I sobbed. I don't know. She's crying too hard to talk. Gerlian, are the kids okay?
Yes, this has nothing to do with them.
Thank you. Sable, can you get some coffee and then we'll figure out what is going on? Jo sounded so calm and sure, the tension that had been in her voice fading as Caroline verified the children were okay. I should have thought of that, but I hadn't. No one can cry forever, and I rarely let myself cry. The smell of coffee helped me out of my tears and focus on my breathing as I pulled away from Jo. Sable handed me a mug of coffee and some tissues. I wiped my eyes and nose and wrapped trembling fingers around the mug. Sorry about your shirt, I muttered, looking at Jo's soaked shirt. It had been an old tee, so not like I'd ruined a silk shirt or anything, but still. Jo snorted. Like I give a fuck? What is wrong? Sable sat on the floor with us. We created a small circle as Caroline wiggled his way over to put his head on my lap, purring. I pried my right hand off the mug and petted him. Tursane asked me to kill her, I said, swallowing hard to keep the nausea down. What? Burst out from both of them. So in between sips of whiskey-laced coffee, I explained everything. It tumbled out in a fast and disjointed manner. I think explaining it took longer than the actual event. They both looked at me, though I stared mostly at the floor. I was still shaking just from the horrible images in my head and the odd sense of double betrayal. Betrayal that Tursane thought I'd kill her, and a betrayal that no one else protested. I don't understand, Sable said. She leaned over a bit to rest her hand on my leg. I mean, I get why you're upset, but why would she think that her death is the answer? She paused and sighed. No, I get that too. But why ask you like that?
It is not unheard of,
Caroline said quietly. He'd been surprisingly silent this entire time. What do you mean? Jo still had her right arm around me, while Caroline had his head and paw on my left. I felt surrounded by love, and it was going a long way to making me feel much more secure.
You treat us as humans. We aren't, he said with a sigh. Your stories of human sacrifices aren't stories to us. They're still part of our lives. There are many areas where food gets scarce, the old are eaten. Granted, they are treated well, but it isn't uncommon for the old to ask someone they trust to take their life. To die for others is honored and expected when times get bad.
You've eaten other cats? Sable's voice was barely above a whisper, and I didn't blame her. I couldn't imagine butchering a calf. The idea made it even harder to keep my lunch down. I didn't think I'd ever be able to eat pepperoni pizza again.
No, that is one of the reasons Esmir is so popular a lord. Since she took the position, the resources are well managed and there has never been a famine. All the beings that live in her realms are healthy and sleek. We lack for little in the way of food, water, or protection. Even the prey is happy and fat.
There was a rumble of approval there.
But if things went wrong, she would offer to die to fix it.
A sacrifice to magic? I asked, my voice still thick with tears.
Yes,
he said simply.
But always it is voluntary. Magic is fickler than you can imagine. You've only ever been to stable realms and pockets. What else exists is beyond anything you've seen.
His voice was calm. But if she's dead, where does she go? Isn't she functionally immortal? Sable's question echoed my thoughts. Most of us believed in an afterlife. Magic was too wondrous for there not to be more, but there was little in the way of a widely established religion. It was hard to have faith when so many could do miracles. Buddhism was probably the most popular, as it worked well with the ideas of magic. It allowed you to become a better person while still doing miracles.
Immortal?
Caroline sounded shocked.
No. Of all of us, only Bob is functionally immortal, and even then that aspect of him can be destroyed. Brix is older than I realized, but all of us can be killed. Gorgons simply age slowly. I believe if she lived to die of old age, she would slowly turn to stone, a statue of herself.
But why ask me? I knew I was whining, but I didn't care. Why me?
Magic. You are the Herald, a powerful queen, a tool of magic. Who else should she ask?
He sounded so matter-of-fact. I wanted to hit him, pound my fists on the ground, and scream my refusal. Instead, I managed to pull my hand from his head and wrap it around the coffee cup. I took a deep sip, letting the whiskey sink into me. I won't. I don't care. Maybe if she was desperately hurt, I could. Or if someone could offer me proof, absolute proof, I might consider it. But no, I won't. My heart hurt with every beat.
And if both humans and denizens keep dying?
His voice was soft, compassionate, and for the first time ever, I didn't want to see or hear him. No, I won't. I forced myself to my feet. I need to see the kids. I just turned and headed down the stairs, the mug clutched in my hand so tightly that my hand ached. "That sounds like a good idea," Joe said softly. They all followed me out of the house and down the street. The coffee was stone cold by the time we got to Marisol's, but I couldn't put it down. It gave me something to hold on to. "Marisol, we're here," I called out as I walked in. The sound of kids in the kitchen drew me there. I turned to see them making drop cookies, smiles on their faces, and the Quetzos on the counter watching very carefully.
"Look, we're making cookies,"
Jazz declared, swinging the spoon around enough so that a bit of cookie batter flew off. Azul jumped up and caught it, eating it with every evidence of appreciation. "I see that. You mind if I watch?" Marisol darted a look at me and the somber Joe and Sable behind me.
"Sure, Mama Cori. You can taste them when they get out."
Mayne grinned as he spoke, and I leaned against the wall. "I'll make us coffee," Joe said softly. Sable pulled me against her, and Caroline rubbed his face on my leg.
"You are my queen. Always."
He sounded sad, and I just ached, wondering what else might be destroyed before I could fix it. We stood there, letting the kids yammer. I'd deal with this later. Right now, I needed to wrap my family around me. Chapter 4. When did Atlantis become hot again? And how can I get in on the research wagon? Are we talking fiction? Because we all know Atlantis wasn't real. Plato was trying to use it as an analogy, and the documentation that would back it up has been lost to time. But really, I can read Greek, Hebrew, Babylonian, and a bit of Viking runes. What is going on? Message on the Emrys Research Board. It took me 2 days to get into a headspace where I could even begin to address the idea. With Stevie, I hadn't known what I was doing. Killing someone when fighting for my life was hard, but I could do it. But just kill a friend because of a possibility? Monday morning, I found myself awake way too early. What was with this finally retiring and I never seemed to sleep in? It implied something very wrong with my mindset. I need to talk to her. I said the words out loud. Caroline had barely left my side the last 2 days, but also hadn't said much. This was one of those cultural things that I didn't know how to broach. With my words as my driving force, I got up, showered, and filled the travel mug with mocha. I needed the extra sweetness. 10 minutes later, I walked into Tursin's grotto. Another Gorgon came out, one I'd never met before. "You must be Cori?" she asked with a smile. Where Tursin was an alabaster white that never seemed to tan, this one was the rich color of ground nutmeg. She also had slitted eyes and obsidian black teeth, but a friendly smile. "Yes. Is Tursin available to speak to me?" I had to talk to her, but I'd do everything to keep it as friends. We were still friends, I hoped. "Yes, she is expecting you. If you want to sit, I'll fetch for her." She waved over to the little seating area I'd been at before. "Thank you." I headed there as Caroline went to peer at the small pond and the fish that darted one way and another as his shadow loomed over them.
"Do not eat my fish, Caroline. You have larger, much tastier options at home, I believe."
Tursane's voice reached us before I saw her. She came out from behind one of the walls.
"I was not going to, but chasing them is entertaining."
He left off and came over to throw himself at the ground next to where I sat and started grooming. Tursane had circles under her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't look like someone perfect and untouchable. She sank into the chair across from me and peered at me with her alien eyes that had become as dear to me as Joe's.
"I fear I have upset you. May I still call you friend?"
The words made my shoulders sag in relief. "As long as you wish to be mine." A similar relief washed through her, and we sat there in silence. It was broken by the other Gorgon coming out carrying a tray with a kettle that still steamed and 2 cups. "Here, I brought you drinks," she said with a soft smile, then disappeared as quickly as she had appeared.
"Ah, Stenia is thoughtful as always," she murmured. "This is coffee from the area you call Greece. When we lived there long, long ago, it was a favorite and still is. I warn you, it is strong compared to what you drink." She poured some rich, dark brown liquid into each small cup, not quite an espresso cup, but similar, and handed it to me. Understanding the test and offering for what it was, I took the cup, sniffing first. Cinnamon, spices, a hint of sugar wafted up to my nose. I took a sip and swallowed in delight. It was rich, thick, darkly sweet, and strong enough that only the Mexican coffee I made occasionally could stand up to it. "Thank you. This is delicious." We sat there quietly. I, at least, didn't know where to start. "I did not mean to offend you with my request,"
Tursane finally said softly.
"It was meant to be an honor."
I shuddered at that and put the cup down, wrapping my hands back around my travel mug. It was made of stainless steel, so I didn't need to worry about cracking it with my grip. Caroline has tried to explain that, but from my point of view, a friend asked me to kill them because it might, possibly, maybe work. And I suppose, way deep down somewhere, it might be worth the price if it did work. A smile started to grow on her face, but I raised my hand. But the odds are very much pointing to the fact that it would not make any difference, and I would be left having killed my friend. I will not do that. I sunk every bit of firmness into those words, even as my stomach roiled. Her smile faded.
"There is that."
"Are you really so anxious to die? Are you sick and see this as a better option?" I was grabbing at straws here, and I knew it. But why would anyone be so ready to let themselves be killed?
No, I just don't know how else to help,
Tersane admitted. I looked up at the same blue sky with a diffuse light and caught the faces peering at us from the door to her home. All of them looked relieved in the second I had to register their presence before they hid again. Keep at the memory stones. I'll start going through mine. I'm headed from here to the library to see how Cleo can help. Tersane nodded and her snakes twisted around, caressing her face and giving little snake kisses on her cheeks. It told me at least deep down she hadn't wanted this, regardless of what she said. Would you like to come? Tersane tilted her head.
Yes, I may not stay long, but I would like to get a library card so I can remember where it is.
I started to rise, but her raised hand stopped me.
Cori, it may get to a point there is no other option.
I stood slowly and looked at her. It might, but I will have tried everything else, up to and including sacrificing my own life before I'm willing to take the lives of my friends. So we had both better make sure there is another way to fix this. She smiled, tinged with sadness.
I can but hope.
She rose and Caroline opened a rip to the library. We entered at the front steps and Tersane gazed at it in wonder.
It is more than I had thought. I knew it existed when asked about it, but then it was gone. Vague ideas of what it should look like didn't begin to do it justice.
I smirked and waved to the door as I walked. Let me introduce you to the librarian. You two have the same dress sense. Tersane gave me a funny look as we went up the stairs, so I expanded. In that you don't wear anything normally. She started laughing as I pulled the door open and we went in. Caroline, can you let Lally and Shay know I'm here? He could talk to their familiars faster and was getting good at talking to Shay. Apparently, the more he was around my strange collection of friends, the more flexible his mind became. Cleo sat behind the desk, checking books in, with a smile on her face. She looked up as we walked in, and the smile grew wider, revealing her long, pointy canines.
Cori Munroe, I have books for you based on your last requests.
Her voice was friendly, and even though the smile proved she was a carnivore, it also struck me as friendly. Thank you. After the revelation about her magic translating anything to a language I could read, I'd popped back asking for books on Atlantis or the disappearance of magic. Out of a suspicion, I'd also asked for anything on phoenixes. I waved at Tersane. She would like a library card.
Wonderful. It has been so long since the library was this popular.
Her smile all but radiated happiness.
Cori, your books are in Carousel 10. Please use the gloves provided. These are old, and while I can repair most damage, humans are oily, and some of those stains are troublesome.
I repressed a laugh and turned to look at Tersane. We are still friends. I just can't even process the idea of planning to kill someone that I care about. And I will do everything possible to make sure this is never a choice I have to make. Tersane dipped her head, the snake still rather subdued.
I understand. Thank you.
With that, I left, going toward the reading cubicle. Caroline had still been following me, though his self-containment was extreme for him. The carousels were small little rooms with books, gloves, utensils for turning pages, and reading stands. It made sense, given how many beings didn't have hands like I did.
Cori,
he said before I reached Cube 10. I stopped and looked at him. He sat down and started to groom his paw, then stopped and looked at me.
You know, I think you are amazing.
I shrugged, fighting not to hunch my shoulders. Yeah.
You are amazing exactly because of how you react and treat your friends. Anyone else would have been dismissive, rude, maybe even eager at the idea of killing a lord. You got upset because a friend asked you to kill them. Would your reaction have been the same if it was Frey or Sharissa?
His gaze was so bright green, I couldn't look away. Yes, though I wouldn't have been so upset, annoyed, even disgusted that they would want it, but the situation wouldn't have reminded me of Stevie dying, of losing someone that I love.
I do not think that occurred to most of us.
His tail lashed as he looked at me, something relatively unusual. Kath in general glanced at you, then kept scanning. They didn't like locking eyes as it made them unable to keep their eyes on their surroundings.
Even after all these years, I still underestimate the cultural differences. And I think I hurt your feelings.
These last words were said as if they were pried out of him. I wrapped my arms around myself, wanting to feel wrapped in someone's arms. Hurt? Maybe. Just the idea, the knowledge that you would think killing someone is something light and easy to do. It hurt. Why would you want me to be the one to do it? We stood there in that huge, empty library, the sense of dust and books a proper measure to the grief, conflicting emotions and the vast gulf that seemed to lay between us. He closed his eyes, tail still twitching as we stood locked in this tableau of pain and love.
On Earth, people that someone respected are often asked to give eulogies at their death, like you did for Henry.
Sure, that is simply being asked to help honor their life. I didn't get where he was going.
For us, once you are dead, your remains are returned to the realms if your people do not have other use of it, either via fire, air, earth, or water. It doesn't matter. We don't have graveyards because even the bones are usually gone in a month. The world here is hungry, and the flesh of those with magic is rich and tasty. It isn't the speaking after the fact that shows the honor, but asking to be the swift strike that ends the suffering. We don't have the medicine or other things you have. Here, if it is time for you to die, the one you respect the most is asked to deliver that blow. Though often it is via magic. You trust they will do it with kindness, honor, and a minimum of pain. That is what Tersin did publicly. She told the entire council that she respected you above all others and that she wished for you to be the one to end her life. Being herald and the cause of all of this were just extra reasons. Mostly she said she loves you.
I froze and played it over my mind. That is a strange way of saying you love someone.
For you, how else do we show love other than offering someone our life?
His voice was calm and measured. I broke. Again. I needed to get over this. But I moved over to him, dropping to my knees to wrap my arms around him. Don't you dare ever ask that. You must be dying in extreme agony with no hope of a cure or solution. It was more of an order than I'd ever given him.
But then you would love me enough to set me free of this flesh?
I hid my face in his coat, but sighed. Yes.
Then you understand. And Cori, you have always and will always be my queen.
It finally hit me that he wasn't calling me royalty, or he was, but more, he was saying he loved me beyond anything he could put words to. I don't know how long we sat there before I pulled back, sniffing. The tears had only been a few and were easily dealt with. I stood, and we moved to number 10, my hand buried in his fur, needing to feel him. I pulled open the door and stopped. I had figured if I was lucky, I might get 5 or 6 books, maybe 10. There had to be almost 100 books in the cubicle. The shelf rose up in the air, and I could see titles spanning further than I could see. Gloves, a stand, and a notepad sat there, ready for me to grab the first book. We are going to need a bigger crew. A much bigger crew, I said, staring at the books. Chapter 5. Mages have floated in and out of government service from the time magic emerged, but when the United States faced World War I, there weren't enough soldiers to fight it. At this time, most mages had a level of cachet in America because the stories of magic users from the old days still created the idea of mages as more than human. In an effort to stem that and supply the war effort with men to fight, men who could use magic, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Mage Draft Act into law. The backlash sent many mages on the run, and soon after the Rogue Mage Division was created. History of Magic. I backed out of the cubicle. Did you remember to call Citlali? I asked, staring at the door like it might explode.
Yes, and Dolly let Scott know.
Would you get your mother, and I'll get Bainjarl? Have Scott come as well, I said slowly. Bainjarl? I pinged softly, still staring at the cubicle full of tomes and parchments.
Yes, Cori,
he responded after a moment. We have lots, and then more books to look at. Would you be available now? I was honestly worried it might take us years. As Tursane had proved, it wouldn't be fast to go through. You could never tell what might have the information needed.
Ah, Cleo found what we needed. Excellent. We'll be there shortly.
Thanks, I said as I turned and headed back to the front desk. Tursane was still talking to Cleo, though from their laughter and friendly demeanor, I figured they were talking about more than books. They paused to smile at me as I walked up. Have you reviewed all of them already, Cori? Cleo asked. No. About that, can you split them up into 7 rooms? At least 2 that don't have humanoid hands? I paused to count beans in my head quickly. Unless you want to stay and help, Tursane.
I will if you need me, but we still have hundreds of memory stones to go through. Why everyone thought their ancestors would want to know every detail of their day, I will never understand. I do prefer the teaching ones. They at least are direct, and often have an index in them.
I laughed. No, we'll figure it out. Thank you. And Tursane? I said as she was about to slither off. I love you too. She froze, glanced at me, then Caroline. A soft smile spread across her face, then she moved out of the library. Cleo tilted her head and headed back to the cubes, humming softly. A piece of my soul healed, and I reached out to pet Caroline. Thank you, I said softly. He rubbed his cheek against me, then the spikes of pain indicated incoming. By the time everyone arrived, Cleo had returned. The books you have requested are split up from cubicle 3 through 10. Remember, no food or drinks near the books, and all the lighting is magically controlled. Use gloves or the provided utensils to turn pages. Most of you are magical enough to pull down a book without touching it. If you summon fire, I will skin you, tan your hide, and use it to repair the older books. Her words were flat and eyes cold. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Yes, ma'am, I replied automatically. She cast hard eyes over all of us. I think Esmir was the only one that didn't flinch under her glare. With that, she flicked a tufted tail at us and headed back behind the desk. Come on, I'll show you. I led everyone to the cubes, though I kept number 10, hoping maybe we'd find something. I was told the magic in here would enable us to read it, So if there are issues, go whine at Cleo, not me. I'm over being responsible for everything." The humans laughed while the denizens just stared at me. I smirked and headed into my cubicle and took a deep breath. "You staying in here with me?" I asked Caroline. We'd learned a long time ago he could read, but reading for pleasure or longer than a few minutes wasn't anything he enjoyed.
"I have little desire to leave you. You need to understand you are my queen, and bad things happen when you are alone."
He wiggled under the desk. I slipped off my shoes and put my feet on him. The slow rumble of a purr helped ground my world, and I pulled on the gloves. I reached for the first book and set it down on the stand carefully. At first, I was scared the magic didn't work, but then the text wriggled and the title appeared. Minoan Legends. I started reading, noting anything that referred to Atlantis, magic, or a city island. It wasn't a long book, but by the end, all I decided was that the Minoans had traded with Atlantis and not much else. With a sigh, my body already hurting from sitting still, I reached for the next. Treatise on sea fishing, weaving patterns, trade good logs, magic of the ocean, life on a boat, unexplained phenomena. I sighed as I laid that one down. I'd broken down and started skimming, setting up looking for the word Atlantis and using pattern to help me flip fast. So far, I had mentions of them. Oddly, the weaving patterns had talked about them the most, with mentions of fibers, patterns, and styles that had come from Atlantis. But otherwise, I'd learned about fishing, boating, water spells, spells to call fish, and that olive oil had been highly prized, as well as salt and ambergris. I'd had hopes for phenomena, but there wasn't anything there except the mention of the storm in the middle of the ocean that lasted for a week, and when it was over, the city-nation of Atlantis had disappeared. But since there were no dates on any of these, it didn't do anything but confirm what I already knew, or at least supposed. I reached for the next one and froze. The True History of Atlantis, by Mara. This is what I remembered seeing in the library when I was here. It was on a pedestal. I knew I'd seen something. I don't know if I was talking to myself or Caroline, but he answered.
"Does it have the answers you seek?"
"I don't know. I haven't opened it up yet. Kind of scared too. If it doesn't, what will?"
"There is so much information here. There may be something in the others. Surely no civilization could just disappear without some records."
One would think, but humans still aren't sure what happened to civilizations of the past. And what we do know, we tend to discount. We're only now starting to realize how extensive some of the civilizations in South America were. I stared at the book while I talked. Okay, let's get to this. With my breath held, I opened the book. Most of the older books didn't follow the same flow that I was used to. They simply said who wrote it and what it was called, then a paragraph of information. This one had an actual title page, then the next page was an author bio. I'd never seen that in what I'd been looking at. I grew up on the shores of Atlantis. My world disappeared when Atlantis did. I will never stop grieving my people, but I don't want all they were to disappear. My hopes rose as I continued to read. It was more of a memoir than a history book, and I didn't skim. I read. It wasn't excellent fiction. There were awkward phrases and some sentences I had to read a few times to figure out. The magic translated exactly. It didn't fix sentence structure. Atlantean, or at least I assumed that was what this was, it could have been Greek, had a syntax that struck me as odd. Run, I beach flat, sand, water, blue, clear. I figured it actually read, I ran on a flat sandy beach near clear blue water. This made it slow going. It described a city from a girl's point of view, talking about the decorations, the food, her family home, and my hopes started to drop. If she had left Atlantis in her teens or 20s, her observations, while interesting, wouldn't tell me what happened. I kept going, laboring through the awkward, to me, phrasing. The last chapter finally had something that at least looked like it might be interesting. I needed feedback on what I read, so I reached out and pinged everyone.
Yes?
Shay said with a sense of startlement. The others sent me a questioning impression. It was like a mental version of Shay's thought. I have something I wanted you to hear, but I don't or can't take this book out of the cubicle. Got a minute? The overall response was yes, and so I read what I'd translated out of the book. Our high priest was selected today. Zenobia is a powerful mage, and she is so pretty all the boys talk about winning her hand. She is pretty, but I don't like her. She always has this sneer to her, like she thinks she's better than us. I mean, she is the high priest and the most powerful mage I've ever heard of, but she's not kind. I like Uriel better. She is kind. I wish she had been elected. There is that. Then pages later, this is one of the last things she writes. I sent the next part. We have phoenixes. They're so pretty. One of them gifted me a feather all the colors of fire. Zenobia talks to them all the time, but she reminds me of a merchant trying to sell something you don't need or want. But I have a pretty feather for my new dress. I wish we weren't leaving. The long sun day celebration is coming soon, and it is always the best. This year, Zenobia said she would start including the phoenixes in the celebrations. I cleared my throat, mentally and physically. Mine speaking like that was an exhausting mental focus. That is one of the last things she says. Her next two are about her boat trip to a place with lots of big buildings and where women are supposed to walk behind their husbands. She has opinions about that. Then she says 2 years later, all communication with Atlantis stopped. They apparently had regular letters back and forth, and they were gone. You think that means anything? There was a thoughtful silence in the mind space, as if everyone was humming under their breath. Citlali spoke up first. Longest Sunday is most likely the summer solstice. Most cultures have celebrated that, and the winter solstice. Longest and shortest days. It would make sense, but I don't know that it gives us new information. True, I said, but it gives us some ideas. I might try to find Bricks and ask him questions. I'm sure after thousands of years, some of the details have faded, if I can get him to talk to me. I didn't mention I was reluctant to cause him more pain, but if there was no other way. Anyone else find anything? Mostly that it did exist. The fibers and weaving were impressive. Esmir put forth. Yeah, I got that too, I said with a wry tone. I now know more about weaving and fishing spells than I ever wanted.
I plan on utilizing those spells next deep fishing trip,
Caroline said with a sense of expectation that made me smile. Anyone else? We had been at it for hours.
Not yet,
Scott admitted.
but I still have at least a dozen or more books to go through.
Everyone else said the same thing, including me. You want to break for some lunch, talk to Cleo, then get back to it? I was dying for coffee and a chance to stretch my legs. The suggestion was accepted eagerly, and I left the cubicle to meet up with them. At the front desk, I smiled at Cleo. Cleo, we're going to have a picnic out front. I ignored the surprised looks from everyone else. Would you like to join us? It would give us a chance to ask you questions. Cleo blinked at me.
Oh, you sure?
Of course. I assume you don't have any allergies, but prefer protein?
Why, yes,
she said, sounding confused. Great, I'll go get us food. I turned to look at the bemused crew behind me. If you'll get an area outside set up as a picnic area, I'll be back in about 15. Citlali started to laugh.
They should have called you Sirocco, Cori. You change everything with the ease of a storm.
I shrugged. What? Everyone needs lunch. You all put too much weight on things. You'll set up a picnic area? I wanted to make sure, as the area right outside of the library was rather bland and dusty.
Yes, Cori, go.
Shay said with a laugh. I sidestepped home, then called 2 delis and placed orders to pick up ASAP. I grabbed the car and hit the local grocery store, grabbing their sushi, chips, potato salad, and disposable plates and utensils. Then I headed to the delis. It took almost an hour all told, but when I returned, it took me 2 trips. A marvel awaited me. Now there was a lawn of grass, a large tree that looked like a willow, tables, chairs, and some blankets to lie on. Cleo sat under the tree, looking around with amazement. "This looks wonderful," I gushed, smiling wide as I set down the food. We all fell to it and talked about what we'd found, asking Cleo questions. At the end of the day, we still didn't have answers. But my ring of friends had grown stronger, and I couldn't argue about that. Chapter 6. Does anyone know an ancient Babylonian treat recipe? Would have to be at least 4,000 years old. I want to make a treat for Cleo, but finding a recipe that would remind her of home seems impossible. Anyone? Response. I've got one for Mesopotamia Mercer she might like. DM me. Message on private library board on Emrys forums. The next few days were torn between spending time in the library and responding to calls for help shutting rips. They were happening multiple times a day, but so far the really big ones were only once every other day. The difference was they grabbed me for the really big ones. The other ones multiple mages could close, but it was still a lot. My brain hurt from parsing language into English. My offerings were dangerously short. I'd used up all my saved ones, trying to do it as cheaply as possible, but I was still running out. My hair was at my ears, my nails down to the quick, and I hadn't needed to worry about my period as I was raking my uterus of offerable material too often. If I knew how to excise my appendix, I might have. The temptation to have it removed so I could use it was there, but preservatives tended to ruin the ability to offer flesh. Yes, mages tried weird things at times. I couldn't handle another day at the library, and it was the middle of the week, so I was curled up in my study, flipping through James's journals. I still had years of stuff to go through. Georgaz admitted he didn't know all the stuff James had done, so I couldn't make any assumptions. Mostly, I just needed the quiet. My phone rang, and I smiled. Chris. We hadn't talked since Christmas. Hey, baby brother, how are you?
Cori, it's bad.
His words were grief-stricken and exhausted. What? I jerked straight up, my relaxation forgotten as adrenaline slammed into me, and I was ready to go.
There was a rip. Things got out, but we closed it.
He said the words with a heaviness that told me what was coming. Who? I asked, my chest hurting for my baby brother.
Laura and Peter.
I closed my eyes. Peter had been his roommate since he went to college. Laura had been the girl he'd been flirting with. Last I heard, they weren't dating, but he was interested. They were going slow, wanting to make sure there was more than lust between them. Caroline, I said.
Going now?
He knew, and I didn't have to ask. Chris, come home now. I'll be waiting. It wasn't a question. It was a need for both of us.
Thanks, Cori. I don't know what to do. Give me 10.
He hung up without anything else, and headed downstairs, prepping coffee with lots of Baileys. Chris lost his roommate and the girl he liked. Caroline's bringing him home. I sent it to the group chat of Joe, Sable, and me. Then I sent another similar one to Marisol.
I'll be over shortly with soup. I have my chicken soup in the freezer.
Marisol responded almost instantly. I can't leave right now. We'll be home soon as possible. Sable sent. Joe just said she was going to pick up the kids instead of letting them do their after-school program. Then she'd be home. They normally got out at 2 in the afternoon, but they both had sports stuff afterward. It wasn't formal. Mostly it just helped them wear off some of their seemingly inexhaustible energy. I felt the spike as Caroline came back and headed out into the hall from the kitchen to see Chris standing in the transport corner, his face gray and pain etched on his face. He had a duffel bag in one hand and the other buried in Caroline's fur. "Chris," I murmured and opened my arms. He was in them, holding on as he started to sob. I just held him. Chris had me by a good 4 inches, as he was about 5'10". At 26, he was still lanky, but muscled as he was a runner. His hair, the same brown as mine, was in long braids that normally hit him mid-back. Today, his hair was flying away and at his shoulder blades. Considering I'd seen him less than 3 weeks ago at Christmas, losing that much offering told me a lot. I just let him cry until he was ready to pull back. "You want some coffee? I've got the fire going in the sunroom." Swallowing, his nose and red eyes, he nodded.
"Let me hit the bathroom. I'll meet you there."
I went and grabbed the coffee, his almost white with the Irish cream, and headed into the sunroom. He dropped into one of the chairs as he got there and reached for the coffee with shaking hands. His tattoo on his temples seemed as faded and gray as he was. His blue, green, and gold looked like the brightness had been drained out of it. I didn't speak until he had a chance to drink some of the coffee. He looked up at me with dark eyes that showed the grief still wrapped inside. "You want to talk about it?" I didn't want to pry. I hated to talk about things to this day, but he wasn't me. He nodded his head jerkily, but didn't talk immediately. "Marisol will probably be here in a few with her chicken soup. Sable and Joe will be home as soon as they can, but it'll still be another hour or 2. Do you want to tell me now, or wait until everyone is here?" He blinked at me, then drank some more coffee. I just let him process it. If what happened was as bad as I feared, there was no need to rush him. The images were probably seared into his soul.
"I want to tell you. I need to talk about it. But I don't think I can tell it twice. Can I wait?"
His voice was rough, and I figured it was both from screaming and crying. Of course. The front door opened. "In here, Marisol," I called out. She came in and pulled Chris into another hug. A better one than mine, to be honest. She had more experience in giving them. "I'm going to place an order for takeout and have Joe pick it up, okay? I don't think any of us will be up for cooking." Chris nodded, and Marisol flashed me a smile.
"Chris, I brought you some soup. You probably need something now. It will still be hours until dinner."
Marisol had looked him over carefully, and I didn't disagree that hot food was a good option.
"Please?"
he croaked, and we set off on our separate things, while Caroline lay at his feet, purring, letting him know he wasn't alone. I ordered food, gave Sable a grocery list, and made sure there was food for the Quetzos. The kids would be good for him. Their open love could go a long way to healing wounds. I wasn't surprised to come back to find him curled up on the floor, lying alongside Caroline, sleeping, the mug of soup empty next to him. I just let him be. "Thank you," I sent to Caroline.
"He is hurting,"
Caroline sent back to me just as quietly. Chris was as open as me to hearing mine speak. "Grief takes all forms," I replied, and Caroline just purred. I headed into the kitchen, finding Marisol there, putting the extra soup into containers for later. "He's asleep, holding on to Caroline," I explained as I helped set the table for dinner later. This way it would be done.
"Good. He needs it. Did he tell you what happened?"
she asked, her eyes dark with worry. Marisol had adopted Chris the way she'd pulled me and Sable into the Guzman family. There were so many days I'd thought of changing my name to Guzman because they had been more of my family than the Munroes had been. Just that it was a rip. The rest is relatively obvious, but I'll let him talk. A burn started in my chest. This could all be laid at my feet, and I hated that I still didn't have an answer. She nodded, and we spent the next few hours letting him sleep, while we cleaned and talked in the sitting room, not wanting to disturb him sleeping in the sunroom. Jo texted she was on the way home when Chris called out from the room.
Cori?
There was a note of worry in his voice that caused a wince of empathy. I rose and headed that direction to find him standing at the door to the sunroom. Caroline was stretching behind him. Hey, Sable's bringing home dinner, and Jo and the kids will be home in a bit. Need anything? He looked pale, and his brown eyes were lifeless.
Maybe.
I walked over and hugged him, resting my head on his chest. Anything. You know this. Come on. I could hear the car pulling into the driveway, and knew in a minute there would be 2 bundles of energy, which would do him good. I pulled away as I heard the front door opening and stepped aside.
Uncle Chris!
Was shouted as soon as the door opened, and the twin terrors aimed right for him. He smiled as he hugged them and listened to their babble about school. They were excellent for distracting. He was dragged up with them to be reintroduced to the Quetzos, because they would have forgotten him since Christmas per Jazz, and hear about their day. Sable followed not a minute later, giving me a wink as she carried in food. Convinced work I needed to come home early. I grinned at her. Excellent. Chris is upstairs with the terrors. I'm sure he will be down soon.
Do you want me to take the kids to my house while you talk to Chris?
Marisol offered, her voice quiet. I glanced at Jo and Sable, who looked torn. I sighed, knowing we needed to make this decision together. I think they should hear. Rips can happen anywhere, and I'd rather they understand all the bad things that can happen. It might give them nightmares, but at least then they won't talk about it being cool, which they've already started to do about the one at the zoo. Sable grimaced, and Jo nodded. Agreed. I'll deal with nightmares rather than them thinking it was harmless. Marisol shrugged, and I couldn't tell if she agreed with us or not. Okay, I'll put the food on the table. We can get the eating out of the way and then hear his story, I said, heading to the kitchen with the carry-out packages. Caroline paced with me as we moved out of the hearing range. Is he okay? I asked, my voice soft.
He is wounded in his heart, but being here will help. He didn't say much, but moaned a bit while he slept.
I nodded as I pulled food out of the bags. Would it help for me to invite any others? Caroline licked his paw while he thought.
I do not believe so. There is nothing they could do to change it, so it is best it stays just family.
Marisol had embraced Chris as a member of the family, just like me. I didn't know if he even spoke to his parents anymore, and I didn't pry. It would only stir up old wounds. Jo and Sable changed clothes while the twins had Chris occupied, then came in to get all of us drinks. 10 minutes later, Sable called up the stairs. Dinner! The stampede back down included 2 small dragons, 2 hyper kids, and 1 rather frazzled adult. Chris had lost the shell-shocked look and now just looked overwhelmed. The twins dropped his hands as they darted to their places. Chris stared at us.
How do you handle that? They are exhausting.
We all snickered, including Marisol.
Lots of practice,
Jo said with a smile.
Come on, let's get you fed.
We all settled down, the adults with stronger drinks available, the kids excited to have their uncle back, though even they seemed to sense he was sad, as they kept up a non-stop babble that was funny, but didn't require much input from the adults. After we had been served and the first rush of hunger sated, I looked at him, with a sad smile, my hands around my wine glass. You ready to talk now? Chapter 7.
The rips that are appearing worldwide have a pattern to them, I believe. I'm looking for more information from other countries. I have the U.S. under control. If you have any information, please send it to ericinaspet@gmail.com. All information will be kept confidential.
Post on multiple boards. He glanced at the kids, but we nodded. Chris cleared his throat, focusing on the plate, then us.
Everyone knows about the rips. I mean, the news talks about it nonstop. But half the time it's like, ho-hum, another rip. As if it's a tornado that wandered by. Or it's the world is ending. There's nothing consistent. The school has set up procedures, but I mean, it's like an earthquake drill. They never happen.
His laugh was bitter, and if I'd been sitting next to him, I'd have probably reached over to hug him. Instead, Jazz leaned over, and Azul crawled down her arm to wrap her tail around Chris's neck.
Thank you,
he whispered to Jazz as he petted Azul's tail. Chris swallowed and continued.
They've been using the air raid siren system, but a rip occurs so fast, and if you're where it appears, the alarms don't do much good.
He scrubbed at his face, blinking back tears.
The three of us were in one of the open areas. It was about lunchtime, and we'd been talking after class. Peter was going to head back to the apartment, while Laura wanted to get some food before our next class.
He fell silent again, and we just waited. It didn't need to come out fast.
We had 15 minutes, so we got up to head out, and I felt a needle jab into my brain. Hard. For a second, I wondered if Caroline had come to get me, but his rips are more like pinpricks. I feel them, but not enough to react or care. This one made me stumble. It hurt so bad. Then Laura started cussing. I turned and saw the rip. It was vertical from the ground up, and it was in front of the campus library. So the distortion stood out really obvious as part of the building was missing.
Both kids were as mesmerized as the adults, everyone wanting to hear what happened.
The siren started going off about then, but we were supposed to head to the library, which the rip was in front of. Peter said we should just head to the dorms, and we were going to, when things started coming out of it. They were like walking plants with open mouth things, like a Venus flytrap mouth. But then they had these fist-like things that looked like a mace. I mean, it had lots of points on it.
Chris fell silent and waved his hand away.
I guess it doesn't matter what it looks like.
It sounds like a kuda. They are predatory plants with limited mobility,
Caroline said with a careful tone.
They are deadly.
Yeah, we found that out the hard way. About that time, people were running around and screaming. We grabbed our stuff. We weren't really thinking, and textbooks are expensive.
There were unconscious grunts of agreement from me, Joe, and Sable. I'd have grabbed them too, to be honest.
We were trying to figure out which way to go when one of them got closer and screeched. Ugh.
He sighed and reached for the rum and Coke we'd made for him.
I know everyone says plants can't make sounds, but these things screeched, and it was loud enough it startled us. Badly. Laura fell. I stopped to help her up.
He took a sip, though I suspected he wanted to drain a bottle's worth of rum to ease the pain.
And then these thorned things came flying out of its fists. They looked like darts. I dropped to the ground and they missed me, but Laura was trying to stand, and they hit her. Peter had turned to see what was delaying us, and they flew right into him.
His face lost what little color he'd gained back over the day, and I wanted to tell him to stop, not to tell us. But I knew he needed to expel it from his mind. The twins were hanging on every word, and the Quetzos had curled up tight in their arms, though they watched Chris with dark eyes as well.
Laura screamed. I've never heard a sound like that, and she didn't quit screaming until she did. I mean, she was screaming and writhing. From every thorn that had hit her, black lines were spreading outwards so fast I couldn't believe it. And her screams... Then she just stopped. All of her stopped. She was dead. I had her in my arms, and she was just gone. I turned when I heard Peter stop screaming too, to see him in a motionless lump on the ground as well.
"Oh, Chris," Marisol murmured. I had my hand around the wine glass, wishing desperately it would lessen or erase the pain. But I knew it wouldn't do anything to make this easier. For any of us.
I lost it. I'm strong in soul, pale in relativity and psychic. Such useless skills.
His words were bitter, and I made a note to teach him about the soul pole, though I didn't know if it would have made any difference in this situation.
I'd already cast Lady Luck, but it didn't really help. Or it kept me alive. I don't know what to say. I remember screaming, and I grabbed the rip and yanked it closed. It cost so much, but I didn't care. Nothing really mattered. That act focused the plants on me, and they started shuffling my direction. I tried something weird.
He took a deep breath and a bigger sip of his drink.
Biology. We've been studying bioelectrical impulses in plants. How they are there, just almost unnoticeable. Well, I took my own bioelectrical energies and slammed them into the plants. I fried their systems.
"Chris, you could have died," Sable gasped. Her dark skin had a gray undertone to it.
I didn't care, he said flatly, and I thought I might have succeeded as doing that knocked me out. I was woken by someone cracking smelling salts under my nose. There were police and response units everywhere. 2 others had been killed by the darts. They'd found me holding Laura with Peter not 15 feet from us. The plants were dead, and they verified I'd closed the rips.
He shrugged, avoiding our eyes.
Hours of questions, triage, and then they sent me home. And I'm here.
We fell quiet, not sure what to say or do.
Do Laura and Peter's parents know?
Marisol asked that quietly, and I was horrified that I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, the cops said they'd been notified,
he said, his voice a low, flat line.
They also said they died so fast that basically the second that dart hit them, they were dead. Nothing could have saved them.
I should have managed to stop this. My brother shouldn't be here grieving because I can't do my job.
They were right. Kudya are only fought by Naga or dragons. Their poison darts will kill almost anything else. The Naga are immune, and unless they hit a dragon's eye or tongue, the darts bounce off. You are not to blame.
Caroline tried to be reassuring, but his words didn't really help much. The kids had migrated to laps during this story, even if they were getting a bit too big. Maine was in Joe's lap, while Jazz was in Sable's. The kids were holding on like limpets, and the Quetzos were mimicking them, wrapping around them in a similar way. "Chris," I said softly, getting his attention. "There is nothing I can say that will make it better. You are not to blame, and you can stay as long as you need. I think we all need a good night's sleep. Do you have a preference?" I didn't know what he wanted or what would be better for him. He sighed.
I don't want to be alone. Can I sleep here?
His apartment in the garage was still there, clean and ready, but I could understand not wanting that distance right now. I nodded, trying to figure out how to get him a bed. I could let him sleep in mine, or I could sleep in the sunroom with a few blankets. Hemadia stepped into the room out of the walls. Today, her hair was all barren twigs, but with the hint of green at the ends. Winter with the hope of spring. There were days I wondered if she read minds, or maybe the house was just that attuned to us.
Chris, I sorrow for your loss.
She looked at us, as if seeking permission.
If you want, I can turn the old nursery into a room for him for a few nights. It would just need blankets and a mattress.
Smiles lit up most of our faces.
Hemadia, that would be perfect. I loved that room.
Chris said with a smile. She nodded and trailed a hand over his cheek.
I do not intentionally listen to you, but emotions are hard to ignore. So I heard. I sorrow for you. Follow me.
I glanced at the others, then shrugged and got up, the rest trailing me to where Hemadia stood in the entry hall. We lurked in the space between the dining room and entryway. She turned once, and a door appeared between the door to Sable and Joe's room and the hall powder room.
I thought it might be best to not have it open into their bedroom. I do not believe you need instant access.
We all laughed. When the nursery had been created, there were 2 doors, one to my room on the 2nd floor and one to Joe and Sable's on the 1st. It made nursing and childcare easy, but he didn't need to be changed in the middle of the night.
No, I think I'm good with just one door,
Chris said with a muted smile. Hemadia floated on a toe.
I do not have a mattress. The one in the garage apartment?
I'll get it, Joe said immediately. If you'll get the room ready, I'll grab it. I'll help. That queen is too unwieldy by itself, Sable put in. Do you want to grab some clothes, Chris? I asked, watching him. He flinched at the idea.
No, there's some old stuff in the apartment. I'll just wear that, or maybe go to Walmart.
I understood the flinch. Peter would be everywhere in that apartment. Okay. Hemadia, is the room ready to look at?
Yes,
she said.
Let me know if you need something else.
With that said, she faded back into the wall. You 2 put the dishes in the sink. Joe gave hard looks at the twins who had followed into the hall. We'll clean up the rest in a bit. Yes, Mama, they chorused and started the whirlwind of 20 trips to put things in the sink. They weren't coordinated about it, but they could do it just fine. I smiled and took Chris's arm. Let's go look. I'd almost forgotten about this room. Together, we stepped into the hall and the new door that sat there. It made no sense logically. Even a closet couldn't have fit in that space. But when we opened it, the room spread before us. Larger than it had been for the twins, a bed frame of curved branches awaited in the center of the room. A chest of drawers sat on one side, and the closet. This time, there was no door to my room. The trees on the walls were still there, and a squirrel scampered across the branches. A bird whirling in the sky caught my eye. Huh. I'd forgotten about that, I said mildly, watching the hawk circle.
Forgot what?
Chris asked. He leaned against me a bit, even though he was taller than me. I cast a glance at him, then shrugged. We had a baby shower for the twins and had an unexpected guest. As an apology for disrupting the event, she gave the twins 2 feathers from her Thunderbird.
That sounds cool,
he said, but his voice was doubtful. It was, but that wasn't the big aspect. Each of the feathers grants access to the AIN. My mind was spinning, but I still didn't see any way it would change the current situation.
Oh, that is cool. You mentioned there was a new representative?
He seemed interested as we looked at the room. Yeah, she's interesting. If I get a chance, I'll introduce you. Hey, a little help out here? Joe called from the front door. We left the room with me glancing one more at the hawk circling up above us, and a shudder ran through me. Chapter 8. With more rips happening and first responders being pulled to deal with them, the increase in deaths due to fires and other natural disasters has spiked. Nationwide, the request for more personnel has increased, but it takes time to get people trained. The question is how many more people will die because our first line of defense is busy with rips? CNN Talking Head. Regardless of my desires to wrap everyone in bubble wrap and put them in stasis where they'd be safe, Chris headed back to school after staying through the weekend. He said he couldn't miss that much school, and staying here, while safe, didn't change anything. It hurt so much to let him go, but he knew he could come back if he needed. Though he said he'd prefer the room back in the garage. The house was too noisy. It was said with a laugh and hugs for everyone. I was back at the library with Shay, Citlali, Bainurl, Scott, and 3 Merlins who had responded to Shay's ad. They were almost catatonic with joy when he'd brought them in, and they were proving invaluable when it came to slogging through all the books Cleo found for us. And it was a slog. There were so many books, and sometimes it was just a note here or there. But one of the Merlins loved doing research and papers. I think his name was Svithani, but I'd only been introduced once. And the only things I could really remember were the yellow and red tattoo, with blinding white teeth and eyes that were so wide with excitement that I worried he was stoned. But he was taking everything we found each day and entering it all in a database on his laptop. He had one that worked just fine, though he couldn't charge it. The fact that the light in the realms was enough for plants to photosynthesize, but not charge a solar battery, was an interesting side note, but nothing I had any time to worry about. Instead, I read. Then I read more, but out of all the books Cleo found, none of them were really helpful. We found more information about Atlantis, Zendia, and the disappearance of the continent. That part was still a low-level argument. Had it been a continent or an island? I didn't care, but it kept the researchers entertained.
Cori.
Himadia's voice pulled me out of a snooze-worthy discussion on trade routes from about 500 BC. The writer must have been Greek, and the stilted information made me want to curl up under the desk with Caroline and fall asleep.
Yes.
A yawn trying to fight off the boredom.
Stephen Alexant is on the phone. He says he needs you.
Okay, ask him to hold. 2 minutes. I felt her assent as I rose. Duty calls. Come on. Caroline rose, stretching like me. It took us a minute to get outside. The area we'd created had become more expansive as others had added to it, creating a beautiful area out front that was perfect for getting some fresh air, sitting and talking, or having lunch. He opened a rip to the house, and I stepped through to my cell phone laying there, screen on. Hey, what's up? I suspected it would be bad news, but getting out of the library felt good. At the rate I was reading, my eyes were going to revolt.
I need you,
Stephen said, his voice hoarse.
I've been leaning on the emergency response groups from schools and houses, but this one is huge. 3 Merlins haven't been able to close it. Can you get there?
He'd been seriously trying not to use me, but it was too big. I was the only one, and I'd managed to keep my fear at bay. Yep. Location?
Right above St. Louis Arch. It's visible from the ground.
I frowned. That's pretty high up. Is it causing issues? If the rips were not causing issues, usually you just ignored them. If nothing was coming out, a watch was set on it, and we let it be. They all had closed so far. The longest time had been 2 days, but nothing had ever appeared except some dust.
You could say that. Water. Fish and water. While the fish themselves aren't dangerous out of their element, they make that marlin look like a goldfish. It's the water that's the issue. St. Louis is flooding, and already the infrastructure is cracking as nothing has been built for this level of water.
Fish? Excellent. We can replace our dwindling stores. Carolyn's eyes were dilated with excitement at the idea. I rolled mine. We still had at least 100 pounds of fish left, but we'd gotten a lot of mileage from the fish, and stasis meant we didn't need to worry about it spoiling or getting freezer burn. Okay, give me a few.
Just hurry. This one is getting out of control quickly.
He hung up with that, and I opened my pack to pull out Carolyn's harness. He stepped into it without argument, and I already had everything else I needed in the bag. It'd become habit. Can you find St. Louis? Neither of us had been there before.
Big silver arch thing?
He verified. Yes. He opened a rip to the crossroads place, and when I'd stepped through, closed the rip behind me. He took a minute, then raked across the air and a rip opened.
This is it,
he said after he'd peered through it and stepped out of the crossroads. Wait, you sure? I asked as I followed and was instantly in over a foot of water. Never mind, I muttered as I looked around. People were abandoning vehicles that were starting to float down rivers that had previously been streets. I moved out of the shadow of the arch to look up. Somehow, Carolyn had brought us right underneath it. Water cascaded down either side, creating a stunning waterfall effect over the sides of the arch, with a roar of sound that matched the sound at Niagara Falls. If it had been planned, people would have come to stare at it. But above the arch, there was a gash in reality, letting water and other things tumble out. As I watched, a fish the size of a large dog wiggled down the arch and hit the rising water with a slap, wiggling out and then away.
Fish. We need to get them. This will be great.
Carolyn's tail was lashing as he crouched, ready to pounce as a fish was swimming toward him, almost too big for the amount of water on the ground. Not now. Help me close, then you can go fishing, I replied, staring up at the rip. When we'd closed the Niagara Falls rip, we'd stopped the water first with the riverbed. This one, I didn't have the option. I'd have to close it without seeing where the water was flowing from. With the rip, I'd fought to close in the ocean. There had been water on both sides of it. That meant there wasn't much flow to resist closing. It had been almost equalized by the time I sealed it. Here, though, the force of water was a major consideration. I stared at it, thinking fast. Carolyn, if I can hold the water back, can you close the rip by yourself? He'd given up watching the fish and looked up the rip.
No, it is not one of mine, and it is larger than I can handle alone.
It was extremely difficult to run 2 magic spells at the same time. I'd done it occasionally, but usually little things like having fire and water dance for me. There was no way to control this level of water, and if it was an ocean or a lake, waiting for it to drain would be deadly. So I needed to block it. I cycled through everything I'd learned in school, but most options weren't feasible. Oh, this is going to hurt. I'd had to scrape my uterus less than 2 weeks ago, so I didn't think I'd have enough to offer quite yet. I'd offer my eggs, but that was almost always an all-or-nothing offering. I didn't think I had enough hair, and offering up my top layer of dermis meant days of looking like a lobster and being uncomfortable. I sighed and dug the sealed scalpel out of my pants pocket. There were multiple scalpels stashed in the pocket.
Must you?
He asked, staring at it, ears back. It's easier than you biting me. Plus, this you can heal. Anything else, I'm going to run out. I can lose blood without risking myself. I hope. There was always a risk of losing too much blood, but I didn't think this rip would require that much. He lashed his tail, but didn't say anything else as I drew the blade along my left inner forearm. Slashing my palm was stupid, as it made it difficult to do anything else with that hand. A long slice down my forearm, not too deep, bled copious amounts of blood, yet I could still use that arm. With blood flowing, I offered to air. I pushed a hurricane toward the rip, pushing back the water. Air thought this was great fun and went at it, but I needed a lot of air. and the arch above me began to sway. I wonder what wind speed that's rated for. I didn't really have a choice if I had to choose between taking down a famous object and something like that kraken getting into downtown St. Louis. I demolished the arch. The arch whipped back and forth above my head as the winds rose. The advantage to this was once it got going, it didn't stop immediately. Air liked being a storm. I'd run the risk of it staying here and storming when done, but that was the price of this level of effort. I twisted my arm sharply to cause more blood to flow out, ignoring the spike of pain. A huge clang sounded somewhere around us, but I didn't pay any attention. The rip and the water had it all.
"Do not offer too much,"
Caroline cautioned.
"If I'm not dead, it isn't too much."
I snapped back. Sweat was running down my face as I pushed the water back. The storm attacked it, and I had to lean against the arch so I didn't get knocked over from the force of the winds. Caroline leaning against me to help with the stability. If this kept up, I'd have to sit, risking the water swirling around my knees. "No," I muttered, talking mostly to myself as I grabbed the feeling of the rip and fought to close it. The howling wind turned my hair into sharp slashes, releasing more blood from my skin, which I used ruthlessly. I used wind to slow the flow enough that I could pull the rip together. Inch by inch, I struggled to seal the break in reality. I slid down the arch, water hitting me at my shoulders, my back pressed against the solid structure. The creaking above me caused momentary spurts of worry, but I ignored it and focused on my job, closing the rip. I had to trust the engineers had done theirs. Already the storm was lessening, so I offered up more blood, urine, and the tips of my nails to whip it into an even greater frenzy. Cars were being pushed down the streets by the wind that whistled by me, laughing in gleeful destruction as I pressed it into the much smaller rip. The arch waved back and forth so hard it was moving me. I watched the surrounding buildings sway with the force of the wind. Deep staccato snaps vibrated through my bones. "Now, Caroline, help!" I leaned everything I had into a hard push with the wind howling around me like a dervish. The water rushed around, threatening to overwhelm me, even as I began to shiver from cold. My arms stung as water and dirt got into it, but I had to get that rip closed. I felt this extra push of magic as I forced the rip to close. With a sudden give, it snapped together, and I collapsed forward into Caroline, whose weight held me in place. The water lashed at me as I let the request to air fade. There was a huge, ominous creak above me, and I glanced up, my heart still pounding from the exertion. A huge piece of metal plummeted down toward us, like a plow share into the ground.
"Cori!"
Chapter 9.
Reports of rips in most every country have been rising. Europe as a whole is reporting over 100 a day, but the minor ones are easily closed by any spirit mage in the vicinity. The larger areas are having more problems with the rips that are large and often difficult to shut. Each country is approaching it differently, but they are managing. The draft board is rumored to be sending people to the various countries to look at their techniques and see if there are things the U.S. can duplicate.
CNN Mage Focus. Water washed over my face as something pulled at me. I tried to figure it out. I realized my backpack was being pulled through the water, and me with it. I'd remembered to strap it on tight before I'd stepped through. My paranoia was paying off. My attention wavered, and black started to creep in around the edges of my mind again.
"Cori?"
Caroline's voice poked me over and over again as water kept splashing on my face. It pushed back the darkness, and I forced myself to grip tight to that mental familiarity. I tried to take a deep breath and choked as more water splashed into my face.
Quit breathing in water. You aren't a fish.
My head lifted up out of water and I groaned as my body shivered with cold. I could hear voices yelling in the distance. I reached up and my fingers snagged on his harness, giving me something to hold on to.
Help is coming.
My body was pulled onto something sloping upward.
My mage needs help here.
There was a sharp tone to his voice, and I groaned as the words cut into my already tender psyche. My head throbbed in time with my heart. I didn't want to open my eyes, suspecting that it would hurt. On the bright side, though, I didn't hear the roar of the water coming out of the rip, nor the wind howling. "Nice, kitty," I heard someone say, and I choked on a laugh that ended in a whimper.
I am not your kitty.
Caroline's voice was acid, and I moaned a bit at the sharpness in my mind. The next words were more moderated, but still sounded like he was pushing and snapping off each word.
She was hit by a piece of metal and needs help.
I heard a groan of metal underneath as he moved away from me. His warmth moved away, and I tried to turn to follow it, but my body rebelled. "Alexand," I muttered, wanting to cry, but that seemed like too much work.
I know. Contacting Alexand now.
His voice reassured me, and I relaxed.
"Ma'am, I'm a firefighter. Can you tell me what happened?"
The voice sounded competent, and I dared to open my eyes. Pain lashed in, and I shut them immediately. I hate being right. "Not sure. Closed a rip. Something fell at us. Last I remember." I could hear the creaking of their jumpsuits and the splash of water as they moved around me. Where was I? Taking a deep breath, I dared to open my eyes again to milder slashes of pain through my eyeballs. The city loomed ahead from the clearing I was in, and I could see people waiting out. 2 men stood in front of me in SLFD uniforms, one with blue eyes and pale skin, the other dark eyes with light brown skin. I took a breath and practiced breathing as my eyes shut again.
"Afraid I need you to open those. Need to check for a concussion,"
one of them said. I forced my eyes open only to flinch from the light, whimper as the flinching caused more pain, and start to slide off what I was sitting on.
"Nope, let's not do that."
Arms pulled me back up, and then phantom hands did a thorough inspection. The goose egg on my forehead made its presence known when they prodded at it, talking as they did so, letting me know what wasn't wrong. Through slitted lids that really wanted to stay closed, I realized Caroline had pulled me through the water up onto the hood of a Porsche, whose nose was just at the waterline. The men weren't panicking, and they hadn't said anything to stress me out. "Smart cat," I murmured.
I will have you know I am at genius level for humans. Alexand is swamped. Sends his things and says he has officers headed this way from the local office.
Caroline paused, and I heard him speak in that overly clear manner.
Is she hurt? Details, if you would.
The men glanced at each other, shrugged, and addressed him.
"Not obviously. Besides the various cuts and bruises, her pupils are equal and reactive. She might have a mild concussion. But overall, she's damn lucky she didn't drown or get badly hurt. That sign could have cut her in half."
He was putting a bandage on my arm as he spoke, making sure it was clean, which elicited a hiss from me. But I didn't argue. They continued to check over while Caroline watched closely.
Good.
Caroline murmured when they were done. There was a strange sigh from him.
Do you have any skin glue or a wrap with you?
"Sure. Why?"
I forced myself to sit up at that. I needed to know why as well.
The sign clipped my tail and cut off the tip. It is annoying, stinging in the water. I do not wish to take the time right now to heal it.
"What?" I jerked up, trying to reach for him, and I cried out as my body protested.
Cori, it is a literal flesh wound. I would just prefer for it not to ooze blood until I am free to deal with it.
I forced myself to watch as one of the firefighters took the tail.
Yeah, I can help. This is going to burn, but I want to clean it first.
Go ahead.
The words were long suffering, but Caroline only hissed, not moving his tail as they cleaned and sealed it.
You were right. Only a minor wound, but I imagine it was stinging with the crap in this water.
The firefighters looked at us.
You two okay to stay here? There are other people trapped, and for the moment, you're safe.
They sounded conflicted, but I waved them away. I'll be fine. People are coming to get me. I'm not moving, and the water's going down.
Okay, we're headed out.
With that, they were splashing away through the water that had fallen to the tops of their boots as opposed to their knees.
Don't move. I need to kill a few things.
Caroline hissed. I opened my mouth, then shut it. Caroline did not handle me being hurt any better than I handled him being hurt. He needed to express his emotions before we went any further. Go. I won't move. I'd barely finished the words before he sprang off the car and grabbed a fish that was flopping by. His teeth grabbed it on either side. Then he did something weird and threw it in the air, cutting the reality underneath it. It fell in and disappeared. He repeated that over and over. Hard, vicious attacks where he threw his whole weight on the creatures, then threw them into another place. I might have felt sorrier for the fish, except all of them fought back with spines, wicked teeth, and thrashing that knocked him around. A long, keening cry of glee cut through the air as he spied a huge thing struggling in the shallower and shallower water. It had to be at least 15 feet long and 3 feet tall. It didn't have a spike like a marlin, but instead had barbs along its spine that retracted and extended. Caroline avoided all of them to reach underneath and flip it. It had to have weighed 400 or 500 pounds, but he flipped it like a toddler flipping a toy car. The water sprayed around it as it tried to right itself, but Caroline moved in and gutted it in a fluid move. Another few slices and the creature quit moving. He slashed to create a rip. Then Caroline sunk his teeth into it and pulled it out of my current reality. Before I had a chance to panic, he walked back out and sealed it behind us. He shook himself, water fluffing away from him. Then, tail still held high out of the water, he patted on back to me. Feel better? I asked. I didn't, really. My body ached, my arm hurt, and I just wanted to sleep.
Yes, and I restocked the larder. Those are true delicacies. They would also make excellent bribes. Few ever get to taste those.
He jumped on the hood, looking me over.
You need to get home.
I know, but let's wait for the officers. Then you can get us home. I don't think I have the strength to do much besides stagger to my feet. If I was being honest, I didn't know that I had that much strength. His narrow eyes told me he thought the same. Before I had a chance to argue, sirens came toward us. I was overly familiar with ambulance, fire, and police. This wasn't any of those. A minute later, a Hummer with lights and sirens came around the corner. 2 men jumped out and headed right toward us. And there is the cavalry, I said with a sigh. I struggled to sit up and almost slid off the hood. The 2 men raced over to me.
Merlin Monroe, are you okay?
Does she look okay?
Caroline hissed. It was obvious he still didn't have his worry under control. I lifted my arm to pet him and hissed out in pain as everything hurt.
Yes, sir. Come on, ma'am. We've got water and can get you back to the office where we have some supplies.
Yeah, I said. I tried to rise, and all I managed to do was start sliding off the hood.
Cori.
Caroline growled in my mind, and I couldn't help it. I flinched. Everything hurt. I was struggling with a headache that was about to break my skull open. His voice dropped to a whisper.
Be careful, my queen. I cannot lose you.
The men at least reacted, and a moment later, one of them, obviously stronger than I would have expected, was carrying me bridal style to the Hummer. He gently set me in, buckled me, and then to my relief, wrapped an emergency blanket around me. I'd started to shiver, and all I wanted was a hot bath and clean water. Caroline jumped into the back next to me. He lay down on the seat, being careful not to bump me, and let his head spread across me. Exercising his strange brand of healing, he licked at my wounds, helping them to close.
I should have done this immediately. I'm not taking good care of my queen.
There was a level of shame in his voice that worried me. You can lick the cuts and bruises, but it won't do much for the pulled muscles, headache, or just exhaustion. Let's give a quick report, then go home. I stopped for a minute, then sighed. And can you let Marisol know I need her? There's no way I can get my clothes off by myself. I need food. Lots of hot food. But I just can't. I hated asking for help like this, and being in so much pain and so tired made it harder, and I had to fight not to cry. Instead, I clamped my eyes closed and just focused on breathing.
I'll take care of it,
he whispered. The rest of the drive to the FBI offices, he licked and healed me, but while the little pains started to heal, it didn't touch the rest of my body, the exhaustion or the headache. They got me into a warm office, offered me hot coffee, and one of the guys handed me 2 pills.
These are just ibuprofen, ma'am. We have an office bottle. Do you want them?
I nodded, managing not to sob in relief as I swallowed them with the coffee. It was horrible coffee, but it was hot, and the caffeine helped with my exhaustion. They had me in an office, in a comfortable chair with my feet up. Then they brought in a screen, and Stephen popped up on it.
Cori, you look like shit. Are you okay?
He leaned forward, eyes darting over the screen, inspecting me. I'm alive. Not sure what else to say. Most of my wounds are minor. I pointed down to where Caroline was licking my arm, where I'd sliced it to do offerings. So I'll be healed. I'm just down about a pint and have a probable light concussion. I need sleep, food, and my bed. He closed his eyes, and I noted his hair had more streaks of gray than it had a few months ago.
I'm glad you're okay, but I take it that couldn't have been handled by anyone else.
I wiggled my hand. If you had a Merlin with air, and maybe someone really practiced with non-organic and transform, plus a spirit Merlin, maybe. He seemed to pale a bit more at that, or maybe I was just tired.
Why?
I explained about the needing to hold the water back to stop the flow so I could close the rip. By the time I was done, he looked as exhausted as I felt.
That isn't good. How often could this happen?
We both turned to look at Caroline, who had most of my arm healed.
Each of the realms has water, oceans, but they're only a small part of the realms, not like Earth. It should be uncommon, but...
He trailed off and laid his head on my legs.
This whole thing isn't exactly normal, so my information is likely inaccurate.
I rubbed his ears. What he said. All I can do is keep looking. We have lots of people looking for information, but I just can't say if I know anything.
I get it. Let me know if you need help. Can you come see me in 2 days? I'd like to go over some data with you and see if you have any other ideas.
He'd been about to say tomorrow, and I was glad he hadn't. Yes, I'll see you then. Now, I'm going home.
Take care, Cori.
The screen went black, and I looked at the 2 agents. If you don't need me, I'm going home.
Yes, ma'am. Where can we take you?
They looked eager and worried. A laugh escaped me. Don't worry about it. I struggled to my feet. Caroline? He opened a portal to the house, and I could see Marisol standing there with Hamadia. The 2 steps it took to walk into the rip and out were all the energy I had. Hemadia caught me with strength that surprised me, though really I should have expected it. Then they put me to bed, fed me, and dumped vitamins and painkillers into me. I slept for 14 hours. Chapter 10. Confidential Memo to Director Alexand.
Stephen, I don't know what you're playing at, but the woman that just left my office looks like a resident of a refugee camp. Why is she out here dealing with rips? What is going on that hasn't been filtered down to the rank and file? Bottom line, what aren't you telling us? I thought the situation was being managed. That isn't being managed if you are driving young women to their deaths to protect us. What needs to happen, and how can I help? Call me if you can't talk about this on official channels. Sincerely, Head Special Agent St. Louis.
FBI email system. The next day, I did nothing but eat and doze. But as exhausted as I was, I bounced back quickly, which meant Wednesday morning I sidestepped to D.C. and Alexand's office. This time, no one gave me or Caroline any flack. We both got out badges and walked in. I looked out of place wearing cargo pants, hiking boots, my backpack, and Caroline in his harness, but I didn't care. Both of us had decided it was better safe than sorry. We strode through the building towards Stephen's office, an odd sight among all the suits. The door was open, so I poked my head in to see him behind his desk, typing. He was in his shirt sleeves and no tie. What I hadn't noticed 2 days ago was his hair was barely at his collar, meaning he'd been offering as much as I had. "Stephen?" I said as I walked in. Caroline followed to rub his head on Stephen's outstretched hand when he saw us.
"You look better,"
he commented, rubbing Caroline's ears. "That is good, though I still want to sleep for a week. I'm still exhausted." I sank down into the chair. Caroline set himself against the window, curling up in loaf pose, just watching us. He'd been overly quiet and almost hovering. I let him.
"You did a good job in St. Louis, no matter how much people are screaming,"
he said as he saved something on his laptop, then closed the lid. "And what are they screaming about?" I asked, not really surprised. It seemed the politicians were always upset about something.
"Well, up until now, the Arch had been rated for wind speeds up to 150 miles per hour. You verified it can stand up to 225 miles per hour. But the other things, not so much."
I might have cared more if he wasn't fighting a smirk as he talked. Maybe. My worry level over some of this stuff was non-existent. Huh. Good to know. But do you know what hit me? Caroline hadn't been able to tell me, and I just hadn't been in any condition to figure it out.
"That would be the other damage."
His smirk faded.
"Your wind grabbed one of the highway signs and ripped it off. It hit the arch and bent. As far as we can tell, when you stopped the wind, the sign fell right toward you. Lucky for us, it only clipped you. If it had fallen a bit differently, both of you might have died."
"Oh," I murmured and glanced over at Caroline. He was still curled up, paws under him, tail mostly healed. "Anything else?" He sighed.
5 people dead, but at least 3 of them were due to stupidity. The others just got caught up in the water before they could get off the street and drowned. But they were dead before you even got there."
I nodded a bit. "And the stupidity ones?"
He groaned. "Nah, some college jocks, and yes, I'm using the term disparagingly, saw the fish and thought it'd be fun to go get some."
Caroline snorted at this.
"Well, they didn't realize these fish were like fighting bulls when the water was past their knees. They died of wounds and were at least partially eaten before the water drained off enough for the fish to die. Speaking of, what do we do with the fish? They were collected and put in cold trailers until I could speak to you."
I lifted my hand and pointed to Caroline. "Talk to him. He was the one that was excited." Stephen looked at Caroline with an arched brow.
They are delicacies both as sushi and cooked. The large ones are more like swordfish. The smaller ones are closer to salmon or tuna. In many ways, they are even healthier than your fish, as our waters have almost zero pollution.
He didn't open his eyes as he spoke, just stayed curled up.
Huh, okay. The food kitchens will be delighted to get them then.
He flipped open the laptop and typed a quick note. So what now? I watched him, waiting. Stephen glanced at his watch.
That depends on you. There's no way you can be the only person to close rips. As it is, I'm trying very hard to keep you as the emergency option, but even so, I can tell you are getting short on offerings.
He gave a pointed glance at my hair and the pink line on my arm.
I've got Charles, the OMO director, Department of Defense people, the head of the draft board, a senator, and one of my deputy directors meeting here in a few minutes to talk options. I'd like you to sit in and hear about what we've got outlined and see if you can think of any other options.
I sighed. My enthusiasm was low, but I couldn't keep doing this. What was going on in other countries if I was having this many issues? How are they closing things? Will there be updates as to what is going on in other countries too? Because if I keep this up, I'm going to be tapped out.
There's supposed to be. Mostly from the OMO standpoint that doesn't have the diplomatic hassles I have, trying to elicit that information from other countries.
He frowned.
Though of late, Japan has been amazingly helpful.
A small slice of pain at losing Hisahito sliced through me. It would have been nice to have his help or insight with this. I can meet with him. Now? My enthusiasm was lacking, but not meeting with them made my life harder. He paused to check something on his computer.
It looks like the senator, OMO representatives, and the draft chair are here. The others haven't arrived yet, but they've got 20 minutes before the scheduled time.
Get me some coffee and I'll agree, and something to eat with calories. I was dangerously low on energy and calories. Food and heat with the wonder that was caffeine sounded great. Alexant grinned, the smile lifting some of the exhaustion off his face.
I can do that. Let me get you situated in the conference room, and I'll run down to our cafeteria. They actually make good food and have a little coffee shop for us government stooges.
I laughed and pushed myself to my feet, swaying a tiny bit. Caroline was there, and his warmth, plus the fact that his back was about at hip level, gave me stability. "How's Indira?" I asked as we headed to the elevators.
Tired as you? She's been on a bunch of the emergency response teams. But with so many rips, the people we have are getting better at closing them. I swear I'm only reaching out to you when multiple people have failed. I need to work on getting teams together that are targeted for different types of rips.
The elevator doors closed and whisked us upward. Different types? My brain wasn't tracking, and I leaned against the elevator wall.
One for creatures that attack, one for water, one for the chaos things. It seems like you need different skill sets for each, unless you're Cori Munroe.
The doors slid open, and he waved me out. Ha ha, but you're not wrong. The biggest problem with this one was volume of water, and that it couldn't affect the water at all. For Niagara, we pulled up the riverbed to block the flow of water. I couldn't even see the bottom to do anything. But hopefully this sort of thing will be rare. I frowned. How many water areas are there in the realms, Caroline? His tail tapped me as we walked.
A few, but only 2 great seas. The rest are smaller rivers or streams. Any lake we have would have emptied in minutes.
He stopped mid-pace.
Wait.
I stopped immediately. Stephen a step later.
Killian?
Stephen asked, looking around.
The conference room is ahead.
Stephen looked down the hall of doors.
Yes. Number 1. It's the largest with room for about 15 people.
The ones in there are talking about Cori and mages. I think you should hear. I will talk for them. 2 of them are men, but their voices are similar. The other is a woman.
Caroline was talking rapidly in my mind. From Stephen's attention, I figured he was also getting this.
Listen, I'll try to copy their voices, but it might be confusing.
His mental tone changed, and voices pinged in my head. I closed my eyes to listen, and I leaned against the wall to help support myself. The blood loss still had me woozy. It started with a man's voice.
I thought we had already agreed about how to handle her. Everything is in process. I still say we just need to reactivate all the Merlins. We can't keep this up otherwise. Are you insane? Do you understand the voting block we are talking about? The number of Merlins that are retired and have nothing to do but meddle is insane. If we didn't have laws keeping them out of office, they'd be running the place. Keeping them fat and happy is the only way to go. If we do this, it has to be specific Merlins. Troublemakers. Powerful ones. The ones that the others can say, see, that person is an outlier. It won't happen to me. Because if they think they might be affected, they will react. I know. Why do you think we're reactivating Munroe? She's always been a wild card. But over the last few years, I'd hoped she'd had her teeth pulled and wasn't going to be an issue. But now, with her bouncing everywhere, saving the day, she's becoming an issue. People are taking notice.
Maybe. This was the woman's voice. The other two I just lumped together as men. But either way, the Rips are becoming a problem. It doesn't matter to a certain extent what we do with her. At some point, she'll get killed doing this. At that point, we will have a Merlin martyr. Then we can use what is left of her to our heart's content. You think it'll be that easy? The woman, again. Did you see what was left of her after St. Louis? Unless something drastic changes, she'll be dead, and we'll have our example to manipulate the masses with. At this point, it's a best-case scenario. She's too powerful. Please, she's a double Merlin, not Merlin. Plus, she's a young woman with 2 kids. That makes her easily manipulated. Imply that children might be in danger and she'll do anything to protect them. The amount of scorn in the man's voice made me wince. The question was, did he realize I'd also destroy anyone that threatened to harm them? Ice had started to form in my veins. I usually went into rage like fire, quick, hot, then done. Today, I was too tired and too pissed off for my temper to be that simple. They should be here soon. We should discuss it later. Dinner tonight, Delmar? Caroline quit translating and looked at the two of us. Alexant was gray, his jaw locked and fists clenched. I swear, Cori, I knew nothing about this. I'm so sorry. His voice made me flinch back at the pain in it. I didn't think you did, but it implies a lot. I wonder if I can use it. My voice remained calm and cool, but my hands shook as I sank them into Caroline's fur. Well, I already know what I'm doing. His voice was so grim I jerked my eyes up to meet his. Don't do anything stupid, Stephen. It won't be stupid, I promise. It is probably something I've needed to do for a while. What about you? My smile had no humor in it, and in the back of my mind there was a growl. But if it was mine or Caroline's, I couldn't have told you. I'll deal with it. Do we go in now or wait another minute?
I hear Charles. He's coming up the elevator with others.
Caroline's comment was almost too neutral, and I knew there was a risk those people in the room might find themselves very dead. I didn't have it in me to care. If he eliminated a threat to me and mine, I wouldn't care. And trying to capture him would be impossible. Stephen and I nodded to each other and flipped the conversation to dinner plans later this month, until the others arrived. Charles smiled as he saw us, and Erichina poked out of the hoodie and waved her palps at me, then went back in. Even to this day, her spider-like body tended to freak people out. The two others with Charles were Alexan's deputy, Daniel Chambers, and the Department of Defense liaison, Chloe King. Chloe was a spirit archmage, strong in soul, which made total sense. Alexit was better at the fake smiles than I was. Mine felt brittle around the edges. We all headed to the conference room. From the way he was acting, either Caroline had given him a warning, or Charles sensed something was up. He kept glancing at the two of us, but I didn't say a thing as we entered the room. The two men and the woman turned out to be OMO Director Brian Harrison, Draft Board Head Oliver Martin, and Senator Heather Perry. We all got seated after the introductions. Before anyone could say anything, Oliver Martin turned to look at me.
Merlin Cori Munroe, per the power vested in me by the FEMA Emergency Mage Activation Executive Order passed a week ago, I am reactivating your draft.
Chapter 11.
It is stated as a truism that magic appeared in the 1850s, but that isn't necessarily accurate. There were mages, usually hedgies, that peppered both history and the remoter places on Earth. But about 1850, people started talking about their emergence, and a coordinated study between Yale, King's College London, and Harvard was created. Oddly, none of the people running the study were mages. This is the basis for where the OMO emerged, along with how they tested and measured mage talents, as well as the ranking levels. In the 10 years of the study, more than 5,000 mages were tested.
History of magic.
And I quit,
Stephen said in the exact same tone.
What?
The words burst out of everyone's mouth at the same time, including mine. I knew the attack of reactivating me was supposed to throw me off balance, but Stephen's comment derailed my planned reaction.
Excuse me?
Senator Perry said, staring at him.
I've decided that I no longer have the patience or energy to deal with political maneuvering, and this is literally the final straw.
Shit, Stephen, Daniel whispered, his face white. I could see the workload dropping on his shoulders, and he was terrified. There was an odd silence around the table. Then Oliver cleared his throat.
Regardless, the reactivation of your draft is started, Merlin Munroe.
The comment pulled me back on track, though I'd be talking to Stephen as soon as this was done. I am well aware of that and will wait for the contract to be delivered to me, but I want to make you aware of a few things. I leaned forward, my casual clothes a sharp contrast to the suits everyone else wore. Caroline sat next to me, his head peering over the table with ease. Senator Perry smirked at me.
Oh, and what would that be?
I am perilously close to the Wandering Mage Act limits, and if you threaten my family to force me to go past what I willingly offer, there will be consequences. Don't push me. My rage was like a sword of ice, and I had to fight not to show them exactly how much danger they were in. The three of them went white and darted glances at each other, but I wasn't about to explain. I won't martyr myself for you, nor will I do anything to keep this quiet. I'm sure the house boards, and I have friends in quite a few houses, would be delighted to share this information. At this point, both Charles and Chloe were leaning in, eyes narrowed, and Arachina had slipped out to stand on Charles' shoulder.
And that would be,
the OMO director said slowly. Though of the three of them, he was the least at risk. The OMO was an association agency like the UN, not one controlled by any government. That the US government doesn't want the retired Merlins, all mages really, who are fat and happy to get upset and realize they could change everything and anything if they knew exactly how badly they are being manipulated. I smiled the entire time, my face aching, my voice perfectly calm.
Oh, really?
Chloe said in a hard voice, her eyes not moving from the original 3. I'm sure my house would love some more details on this. Could you elaborate? Well, if they reactivate everyone, those Merlins might get upset. So instead, they are going to use me, after they manage to get me killed, of course, as the whip and the carrot. Isn't that correct? Show what can happen to you if you don't toe the line, while simultaneously praising me and holding me up as the example of a patriotic mage. Charles pulled out his laptop and started typing. His speed always surprised me. He told me once he typed about 100 words a minute. I was lucky to get 35. What are you doing? Senator Perry snapped out, her eyes like claws. I might have been more impressed, but when you were exposed to claws from the Cath, not much measured up. I'm calling up the boards for 3 of the houses. I was bored and offered to take over managing the forums for them. I'm creating a pinned post that anyone logging in should be able to see. And while that is getting prepped, I'm pulling up the numbers of retired Merlins and what district they are in. Another few minutes, and I should be able to have a post that details who the representative and senator for each district is. So they know, and I'm highlighting yours, Senator Perry. I'll make sure they all know exactly what you are in favor for. He didn't slow down as he typed. Cori, can you verify what she said? This was from Chloe, who had a poker face that didn't quit, but I could feel the rage in her soul. I paused for a minute, wanting to give Caroline credit, but in this situation, it would actually hurt our case, not help it. Yes, I can. She said, quote, Did you see what was left of her after St. Louis? Unless something drastic changes, she'll be dead, and we'll have something to manipulate the masses with. At this point, it is a best-case scenario. She's too powerful. Then they argued about me being a double Merlin, not the actual Merlin. And letting my secret slip about that wasn't what I wanted to do. I petted Caroline in mute apology, though I knew he didn't care at all. The 3 had gone even whiter. You have no proof, the senator stammered. You mean, do I have recordings or other evidence? No, I said calmly. But as anyone with a modicum of true sense would know, I wasn't lying. And you are. It's a moot point. I just smiled, all teeth. Excellent. Let me see. I have the data and the reports, and just for fun, I'm linking each elected official's voting record to the post. Oh, and because I can see the questions in your eyes, I took over the tech support for the Elemental, Emrys, and Hallows. I'm sure the House of Spirit will be very interested as they are the group being drained the hardest trying to close rips. His smile was as friendly as mine, and with Arachina perched on his shoulder, he resembled an avenging spirit. From the paleness of Perry and Oliver Martin, I was pretty sure they realized their careers were over, and if she wasn't dismissed by the end of the week, I'd be surprised. Not all mages are as stupid as you think, I said mildly. We understand the controls around us, though we don't always agree. But if you turn us into cannon fodder, we have nothing to lose by rebelling. And if that comes to pass, there are many details you are completely unaware of. Anger was making me reckless, and I tried to keep it down. I should ask permission. Caroline, can you ask Kessis or Seatlali, may I publicly state that the AIN is my friend and will have my back? The plan brewing in my mind was audacious and could bite me. But if she said yes, the possibilities were endless. Yes, he whispered as I watched everyone stare at us. Are you trying to get me to rescind your draft? Oliver Martin asked, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. No, I figure I've been doing the same thing the draft would have had me do. Now you have to deal with anything I do or injuries I cause, and you're also on the hook for all my medical needs. I shrugged as I was already planning on some massages billed to them. Besides, it lets me prove exactly what the draft office will do. I turned my head to glance at Charles. Would you do me a favor and add that to the pinned post? Give them the date and time Merlin Cori Munroe was recalled to serve as an example. His fingers were still flying on it, and so far the posts have had over 1,000 views. You might want to check your email, Senator. Charles was as calm as I was, though his rapid typing implied he was implementing something. Either way, the people here were about to pay a high price for their actions. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone and started scrolling, her skin leaching of color as she looked.
I think you forget, Senator,
Alexan said, his voice silky.
Just how many mages are being contributors to political offices?
She says yes. It plays well into their current plans.
Just who was Silali? Either way, it didn't matter, and let me prove I had a much bigger stick than they had ever suspected. Now that you see the folly of your ways, I have one more piece of information to provide you. I swear they all tensed watching me. The AIN are friends of mine and will back any choice I make. If I had gotten up and slapped them, I'm not sure their reactions could have been any more stark. Through all of this, Brian Harrison had been the least affected, but at that comment, he went gray.
You are speaking with the AIN?
He stuttered the words out. Yes, I have friends that I see regularly. There is much about them no one knows. I leaned forward a bit. So many more areas than what you know of. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he digested that. I let that lay there long enough for me to get my thoughts in order. Now that all the posturing is done and I've proven my reach is much bigger than you thought, as far as I see it, you have multiple problems. You need a new magical crimes director. Good luck finding anyone even half as good as Stephen was. And the fact that I did so many favors for him is gone. Now everything will go through official channels, or I won't respond to the request. I needed to be careful here. The idea of not helping if I could save lives would make the lie clear. But then politicians couldn't be mages. The realization slammed through me like a lightning bolt. None of them were mages, so they didn't know when people were lying. Most people didn't lie in their day-to-day lives, as even pale psychic hedgies could truth tell. I filed that far back in my mind. With an effort of will, I pulled myself back to the conversation at hand. You need to come up with better ways to alert people to the rips and respond. And finally, we need to figure out other ways to respond because no matter if you put a gun to my head, I'm almost tapped out. Caroline growled at that, pulling the attention of everyone in the room. Oh, yes, about that. I promise you, if you threaten or hurt my children, my partners, or any of my family as a way to get at or control me, you will find out firsthand what I did with the nuke in D.C. My voice changed from friendly to flat and hard, and I leaned forward, the smile gone. I'll grab you and drop you in the realm, and you can die there. If you're lucky, it will be fast. If not, you'll have to see if you die of radiation poisoning or dehydration first, and I won't spend a second feeling sorry. At that, everyone in the room looked at me. Chloe, Daniel Chambers, and Stephen with something that resembled surprise and respect. Charles just nodded, a corner of his mouth tilting up in a grin. The silence stretched as I just sat there scratching Caroline's ears as they stared at each other and their phones. Finally, Stephen's deputy, Daniel, broke the tense stalemate.
Stephen, can I talk you into at least giving us 2 weeks?
He sounded like he would beg. Stephen stared at the people assembled, his jaw clenched, and I could tell he really wanted to just walk out. But the man I knew would never be able to leave with it in this situation.
I will work until the situation is resolved. But I want to make it very clear the second it is over, I'm done. I will be going to my boss after this meeting, making it clear that if there is a single incident of political interference in my job, I will walk, and you will not be able to find me. No more. I expect you to take this back to your peers. Make it very clear I'm done. If they want someone else in this position, please feel free. But anything else other than a replacement will see me walk. Am I understood?"
All of them nodded, looking wary. From the constant vibrating of their phones, I guessed there was a storm brewing, and I didn't care. We spent the next 2 hours hammering out what they would bring back for vote, changes to implement in their own offices, how to prioritize the RIPs, and a promise of budget for the Magical Crimes Division under emergency spending. I was assigned a controller and given a special as needed duty position. They'd have everything to me in the next day or so. Charles provided numbers that removed what little joy I'd found in the proceedings. Once again, I'd lost control of my life. Plus, I never did get my coffee and food. Chapter 12. The Trail of Tears is one of the most horrific things the American government did, and it, as well as the power of magic, resulted in the formation of the AIN and their separation from the rest of the world. While the area around their walls has been mapped in detail, there is no concrete information as to what the land behind those walls looks like. It is estimated to contain 23,000 square miles and is broken up, surrounded by various states: Washington, South Dakota, Nebraska, New York, Utah, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. I went home shaking with low blood sugar and exhaustion.
"You need to eat and get some sleep,"
Caroline scolded as he walked next to me, ready to brace me if I fell. I know. I stared around the house. The kids were in school, Joe and Sable at work. I desperately required calories, and all I wanted to do was crumble in a ball and cry. The draft had been bad the first year, and even later it had never been fun, but it hadn't been horrible. Now, I suspected it would be horrible. I had to get food in me and rest. I wouldn't have time soon. My legs wouldn't move, and I just stood there, swaying. There was food in the fridge. I just needed to go get it. Walk. You can do this. Walk. Microwave. Easy. The words went through my mind, and I nodded to myself, knowing what I needed to do. But I didn't move. A low growl with a pinprick of pain grabbed my attention, but by the time I could focus, Caroline was gone. Oh. I stood there, swaying, trying to convince myself to move. The jarring sound of the doorbell wrenched me out of my inability to move. Habit dragged me to the door via ingrained responses. You answered the door when someone was there. I pulled it open, and a delivery driver stood there, a package in his hand. "Special delivery, Cori Munroe." My head bobbed almost without any conscious effort. "Excellent. Here you go." He shoved it at me, and I took it. He grinned and raced back to his truck. The package said draft office. They moved fast. Or they had planned this before they even got there. That idea seemed more likely. I stood there, package in one hand, door held in the other, and I stared at the street. "Cori?" Marisol's voice had me turning to look at her, then back at the street. Had she come in and I missed it? "Oh, you are in a bad shape. Come on." Her warm voice and hands wrapped me up and took over. I was never so glad in my life to give up control. Soon enough, she had me in the sunroom, the fire going, a cup of tortilla soup in my hand, tortillas to dip, hot tea, and a bottle of electrolyte replacement. The shaking stopped as I ate, the heat and calories helping to smooth me out, but I still felt like all my energy had disappeared. At some point, the bowl was emptied and taken from me. Another tortilla with cream cheese, sugar, and cinnamon was placed in my hand, rolled up. "Eat." Marisol sat down across from me, worry on her face. The sugar and cinnamon helped pull me into an awareness. "Thank you." I take it Caroline went to get you?
Yes, he said you are overloaded and exhausted. That might have been an understatement. Are you better now?
No, but I don't have a choice. The food was getting my brain to work, and I started compiling the list of things I needed to do. First was dealing with the library, then with the draft. Can I lean on you a bit more to help me with some stuff?
Oh, Cori, always. How can I help?
Her warm eyes smiled at me, and I wanted to just fall into her arms and let her do it all. Unfortunately, that wasn't an option. Caroline, I need Lolly, Esmir, and Shay. We need to get the library research off of me for the most part. I have a book I'd like to read, so... I sighed. There was nothing I wanted so much as to put this off, but if I dealt with it now, I could move on. Never mind. Can you ask them to meet me at the library? Caroline tilted his head.
Shay and Esmir are there now. Lolly is headed there. But you should rest.
He growled at me softly, and I put my hand on his head, trying not to laugh. Or maybe it was sob. I know, but food helped. I smiled at Marisol. If I can get a few more of these, I'm thinking I can get to the library and back in under 2 hours. Then I'll pass out. I promise. I held up the tortilla wrap in my hand, and she nodded with pursed lips. Caroline actively growled and bit my hand, not even breaking the skin, but his teeth pressing against me.
You will rest soon. I will not lose my queen, and I will stop you if you try to use any magic. You are too exhausted.
I popped the last bite of the tortilla roll in my mouth, then touched his nose with my free hand. I know, but I can't quit now. Would your queen quit? He dropped my hand with an agitated swish of his tail.
No, but you will not use magic.
I simply nodded, not wanting to commit to anything. My life didn't seem to allow for absolutes anymore. I sat there for another 15 minutes, sipping the tea, and then I forced myself to get with it. I guzzled down the remaining electrolyte drink and stood. I slipped my pack back on and looked at Caroline. Would you do the path, please? At this point, even using the smallest bit of magic both would annoy him and might make it so that I didn't have what I needed at the worst time. His tail lashed, but he opened a rip, and I could see a glimpse of the library beyond.
Cori, remember we love you and don't want to lose you.
Marisol's comment caught me unaware, and in a rush, I remembered the veiled threats toward my family. I didn't want to leave them, but if it was a choice between my life and theirs, there wasn't a choice. I know. I'm trying. I promise. She handed me a bag with the extra roll-ups, and I stepped through. The calm of the library seemed jarring when compared to the chaos in my mind. I sighed and headed up the steps. Once inside, I headed directly for Cleo.
Herald,
she said with a nod. How may I assist you today? She seemed happier and almost glowed with satisfaction. I could hear the sounds of people in the library, and I swear there was a giggle or two of glee that came from the stacks. Not a sex giggle, but the, oh shit, look what I found, giggle. Right then, I wanted to be that person, but not today. There is a book I've been trying to find time to read, but other things keep popping up. Can I check out a book? I didn't know if she allowed that, and some of them were so old that I was worried about touching them, but the worst she could say was no.
Not exactly. We can't risk losing any of the volumes.
I sagged a bit, but I had expected that answer.
But if you bring the book in question to me, I will show you how it works.
Oh, okay. I perked up a bit at that and turned, planning on heading to my regular carousel where my books still were, but the others were waiting for me when I turned around.
Cori, you look like shit. What happened?
Shay's words were blunt, and even though Caroline growled, I couldn't help but laugh a bit. He was never anything but blunt with me. It would have been better if he'd been less accommodating with the other counselors, but it was getting better. Rips into one of the realm's oceans? It was difficult. Esmir cocked her head, looking at me. Water from our realm? That is interesting.
It was not pleasant, but I did get many fish.
Caroline preened a bit as Esmir's eyes lit up. Oh? She said it a bit coyly, and I realized I really needed to try these fish if they were that valuable a commodity.
The spine backs, razor fins, sweet flesh, and 2 others.
He licked his muzzle, and I rolled my eyes. If we are done talking about food, I've been reactivated. Shay paled, but Sitlali and the denizens just stared at me uncomprehendingly.
Shit. Really? How did they justify it?
Shay asked, his fingers twitching. Emergency executive order. I don't think it's going to be widespread, but it is there. What is reactivated? Sitlali asked, a frown on her face. I quickly explained everything, and I could see the anger gathering in everyone. Look, I get it, but it doesn't really change anything about what I was doing. Just makes it more formal and less a favor to a friend. I took a minute to expand on the information that had been shared. At this point, I'd gathered an audience. The other mages we'd brought in to help research, denizens, even Cleo had come over to listen. Quickly, I covered the boards, notes, who was involved, and the threats. Most of the mages we'd pulled in were Merlins, and all of them had at least 20 years on me. They were not happy about this. I get that you aren't happy, but I can't change it. If you don't like it, tell people. Contact your movers and shakers. But right now, I need to free up my time. I can't be here. I need to be on Earth dealing with things, and I'm so perilously close to being out of offerings, it isn't good. The worst part is because I've had to be in all of these different places. They know Caroline can find where we need to go, and they're going to leverage it. Hard. I'm the perfect agent. But it means they are most likely going to start looking at other mages with familiars to see if they can do the same thing. So be warned. This I said to everyone, and I could see people started to realize the long-term consequences of my abilities being so public. Sitlali, I use the AIN as a club. I don't know if this is going to bite me or not, but hopefully they'll slow down in their plans to roll over me. The tall woman shrugged, her silvery hair waving down her back. Don't worry about it. The plans have already been set in motion, and our people have reached out to contact your government, Australia, and China. There are some upsets coming soon. It will not be an issue, and as we regard you as a friend of the nation, it only supports our plans. Good. So keep it up. I don't know how to stop what is going on, and I'm not sure what else to do to stop this. The rips are becoming more dangerous. I looked at them, and my skills aren't best served here. For a moment, the knowledge that my skills at research and biology had never been used to their full potential hurt. But now it just didn't matter. We got this. You need to work on eating as much as you can. But one of the archmages over here had an idea about offerings she wanted to talk to you about. Shay said, waving at a petite woman. Okay. Anything else? There were shakes of heads, lots of dark looks, and more than one headed home with the assistance of the other mages or their familiars. I went to talk to the mage, Sheila. While nothing she told me was earth-shattering, it did give me some ideas on how to offer even more effectively, mixing blood and other offerings. At this point, even a 5% increase could make a huge difference. I headed back home 2 hours later after verifying with Sitlali and Shay I would be available if they needed me, either via their familiars or Sloane's or by cell phone. When I got back, I opened the package that had been delivered and found wrapped up there the next phase of my life. A phone, a small notebook with names and numbers, a contract with the rates and on-call status, and a picture and name of my handler. Forcing down the desire to cry, I put it away to deal with in the morning and headed to see the kids and Joe and Sable. they'd be moving soon, and I planned on enjoying the time with them now, before I needed to make sure they were safe from me and the trouble that followed. Chapter 13. Which is more devastating, a rip or Merlin Cori? That is the question on everyone's mind today in the aftermath of the St. Louis water attack. The water that poured out on St. Louis put people at risk, and the creatures that came with it surely did. But at the end of the day, it was just water that ended up in the river. But Cori Munroe called winds that did widespread damage and risked making buildings safety hazards. If this is the sort of help offered by the government, should we be finding other options? New Yorker editorial. I didn't have time to investigate the phone and the documents the next morning before it was ringing. Yes, I mumbled as I staggered downstairs with the phone in one hand. I headed for the coffee machine. Today was shaping up to be a pot day.
Cori Munroe, we need you. We have a level 4 rip.
That was one of the good things about the meeting. With the OMO and Charles there, we had hammered out levels of severity for the rips. The little ones, like what I would practice with, were level 1. Ones where creatures smaller than a cat, house cat, not Cath, could slip through were 2. 3s were mid-sized with creatures slipping out, but nothing pushing against them. 4s were active with chaos tentacles poking out. These level 4s required 2 mages, one to deal with the tentacles, usually air to handle lightning, while the other focused on closing the rip. 5? Well, 5s were large amounts of water, a huge rip, or immediate public danger. No, I said as I set the phone on the counter with the speaker on. Per the agreement with the draft office, I was to only be called for Class 5 rips, and I really hoped they weren't more often than once a week. You need to head to... What do you mean, no? The voice was male and youngish, though until I finished waking up, it could have been a teenager and I just wasn't paying enough attention. I mean, no. Level 5 is what you call me for. I don't have the offerings to mess with anything that anyone else can handle.
But they said, I was told, you need to go.
The young man sputtered on the other end of the line, and I just loaded up the coffee maker. Extra cinnamon today. That might help. There would be sugar in this cup. Lots of sugar. Too bad. Level 5 or nothing. And who are you? I peered at the phone through barely cracked eyes. The lights in the kitchen were horrible in the morning, way too bright. We really needed to put in dimming bulbs.
Stanley, ma'am.
I blinked, trying to remember the name on the sheet. It hadn't been that. It had been a female name. The coffee began to brew, and I resisted the urge to lean my head against the refrigerator. The name popped in my mind. Yolanda somebody is supposed to be the only person contacting me. Well, her or Stephen, but not this Stanley.
They just told me to call and tell you to fix it.
He stammered, and I shrugged. Not that anyone could see but me. No. With that, I hung up. The clock displayed 5:30, and I bit back a whimper. It wasn't worth going back to bed, and since I was up, I might as well make food for people. With a sigh, I pulled out bacon, eggs, and chopped up potatoes. That had been a lifesaver we figured out a long time ago. Zap the potatoes in the microwave for about 5 minutes, then chop up. They would cook up quickly in a pan and tasted great.
Why are you awake?
Caroline sat in the entry to the kitchen, yawning, his teeth looking like daggers. Stupid phone. Someone got a hold of my number already. I said no. I didn't talk to him so much as the stove that held a pan that I was about to put bacon in.
Smart queen,
he commented.
Could you grab me a bowl of fish?
I nodded, pulling down the bowl, then opened the cupboard to the stasis field. He and Joe had spent some time while I recovered processing fish, and there were stacks of it chopped up and ready to go. I grabbed a handful and dropped it in the bowl for him. Caroline was perfectly capable of grabbing the fish himself, but we all preferred him eating it out of the bowl. especially Hamadia. She did not like rotting fish blood on her floors. I put the bowl on the bar counter, and he jumped up into his seat and put some hot sauce on the fish before tossing it in his mouth. Hot sauce on sushi just never clicked right in my mind. The bacon was about done, and I threw the potatoes in the grease as Joe walked in. "You're up early. Decided you were missing us already?" "Yes, that's it," I said. My hands were wrapped around the coffee as I let the steam wreath my face. "Coffee's made. Extra cinnamon." "Yum. So why are you up?" "Stupid phone call." I said no. I took out the bacon and stirred the potatoes. Another minute and I'd cook the eggs. Scrambled or fried? Those were the only two options when I was the one cooking. "Oh, fried, 2 each for me and Sable, but scrambled 2 for the kids. I'll make the burritos." We worked in companionable silence. "You know you can come over in the mornings. You are never blocked from the house," Joe said into the silence, and I started as my mind had been on trying to get more protein and vitamins into my body and process it faster. "I know," I said, looking at her. "Hamadia says the door should be done next week. To both places. Mommy's house and ours will have doors for you. You just need to decide where to put the doors." She didn't look at me while she talked, and I leaned over and kissed her cheek. "You could live on the other side of the world, and you would still be the woman I love best in the world. Promise." My words were honest, and I just hoped I'd lived long enough to see the kids become the awesome adults I knew they would be. Joe laughed, the momentary sober mood vanishing. "Not the being? Well, that blasted cat sitting over there has a pretty hard hold on my heart. Then there's my brother, the kids, Sable, that are all kinds of tied to my heart. So, nope, I love you more than any other woman on the face of the earth." She laughed and kissed my forehead. "I love you more than any other Merlin." We both started laughing at that as I cooked eggs. The kids came tramping down the stairs, followed by Sable. We ate, laughing and talking about school and work. The mood stayed buoyant until they left, and I headed upstairs. Caroline followed me, laying across my bed and taking most of it.
"I will sleep. You should too."
"Nah, I need to take a shower and get dressed. I also want to run to the store and get some more energy bars. I'm not eating them often enough in the field." He yawned again and closed his eyes. I'd managed to get showered and dried off when Hamadia called out from the bedroom.
"Cori, this device is ringing."
With a sigh, I walked out, still naked, giving her a smile and a nod. "Thank you, I'll take it." She beamed at me.
"Don't forget to give me where you want the doors."
"I won't," I said as I answered. "Yes?" "Cori Munroe, this is Yolanda Regalio. I'm your handler. I hear you refused an assignment this morning." The voice was arch and vaguely imperious. My heart sank as I realized this would be an adversarial relationship. How far did I want to push this? The answer came in a flash. All the way. I was tired of all of this, and I was literally bleeding myself dry trying to help. 1 minute. I reached for my coffee cup, took a sip, and grabbed underwear and a tank top to pull on. Then I sat on my bed and picked up the phone again. It had been much longer than a minute, close to 3, and I didn't care. "Okay," I said, ready to deal with the hand magic had dealt me. "You will not make me wait," her voice snarled out at me. "I expect instant response when I call. You are." I hung up. This is going to be a long day, and I forgot to get the book I wanted from Cleo. When this is done, do you want to swing over to the library? Then we can head to the store? "Fine," he murmured, still mostly asleep. The phone rang again. "This is Cori," I answered. "You hung up on me. How dare you?" Her voice was a screech of outrage, and I hung up again. "How long do you think I'll have to keep doing this?" I headed over to find pants and socks. If I needed to run, I'd rather have clothes on. "Twice more." He was wrong. It was 3 times. And each time I just hung up. The fourth time, someone else was on the other end. Steven.
Morning, Cori. Causing problems already?
Me? I'm not doing anything. I'm just setting boundaries, and they won't be crossed. By this point, I was back downstairs, refilling my coffee and planning the day. Library, then home. This weekend was going to be the official moving day, and I didn't know if I was ready. You are a draftee and will listen when I talk. Yolanda snapped at me, and I sighed. Before I could respond, Steven cut in.
Yolanda here is a former manager of one of the rogue mage teams. She's used to dealing with a rougher crowd.
Steven sounded like he was trying to be cajoling, but mostly I heard exasperation. And you talk to them like that and you're still alive? I had a hard time imagining anyone talking to Scott like that, but maybe that was just me. They are responsible for following my instructions. Her voice was rapidly getting on my nerves. Awesome. Well, here is how it will go. I will speak to you, and only you. You will let me know, politely, where the rip is and what is going on. I will say no if I feel that I don't have the ability to deal with it at that time. She started to sputter, and I cut her off. I am well aware that I have been reactivated as the martyr to the cause, and at this point, most other U.S. mages are aware of it as well. I've been making offerings of blood because I am so low on genetic material. Do not push this, because I have very little patience at this point. If you yell at me, if you start demanding, if you call me names, I will hang up. Do you understand? I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, still in socks, sipping coffee.
Yolanda, she isn't kidding. She will give everything she has, but if you treat her like a misbehaving animal, she'll walk away. She doesn't bite, she simply leaves.
I could hear the sputters on the other end and almost laughed. She can't do that. She's been reactivated. She'll be killed if she doesn't listen. Steven cleared his throat, and I could hear him trying to figure out how to phrase this.
That is true, but here's the hard truth. Right now, she is the only mage who can solo close Class 5 rips. If she is killed, if she vanishes, our country's in a load of hurt. So explain to me exactly how threatening the killer is going to motivate her at all.
My previous bosses would have never done this, and I made a mental note to ping Scott when this was done. I had questions. There was a long silence on the phone. Miss Munroe, is it true you said no to a call earlier? Her voice was overly formal, and I preferred it that way. Yes, it was for a Class 4 rip, and multiple mages can close that. I am to be called only for Class 5 and above. She cleared her throat, but continued in the same formal tone. Very well. That has been noted. I will be your only contact. Is this the best number to reach you? Yes, it will almost always be answered, but if I'm not available, someone else may answer it, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Her voice sharpened. And why would you not be available? Or not be answered? I would have preferred if she wasn't so snide in her tone, but I answered it. If I am in the realms, I leave the phone here as there is no service there. Usually, I will be contacted in 1 to 5 minutes. If I am in the middle of closing a rip, I am unable to answer. All I could do was hope they never called during a council meeting, but perhaps Freya was more forgiving than Brix had been. Her voice sounded reluctant, but she responded. That is valid. I will contact you when you are needed. She dropped off the line, and I sighed, knowing Steven was still on there. Are you sure you don't want to grab Indira and just run away to Fiji or something? He laughed.
I am very sure I do, but I'm hoping this can get resolved before I bail. Have you made any headway?
No, and I'm running out of things to try, I admitted. I'll keep you posted. We hung up, and I refreshed my coffee. Chapter 14. Mage reactivated. For the first time in almost 50 years, a mage who has fulfilled their draft has been reactivated, and this time it is the Merlin with the mostest, Merlin Munroe. You read that right. Even though prior to now she has been responding to rips and closing them, she now has to do it as she is back under government control. The question of the day is going to be, can we trust the government to manage Merlin Munroe correctly, or will they squander such a precious resource? Magical Daily News. With Caroline following me, I darted into the library. I wanted that book. With all the hubbub yesterday, I'd gotten sidetracked. Cleo, you said there was a way for me to get a book that I could take home? Yes. Do you have the book? She asked, looking down at me. I was always surprised by her size. Her head was about the size of my torso. It just seemed like I was looking up, even when I looked right at her. 1 minute. I darted to the carousel and brought back The Evolution and Life of Phoenixes by L. Brash. This one, please. What do you know of the being that wrote this? Cleo smiled as she gazed at it. Nothing? That surprised me. Why would I know about an author who wrote a book thousands of years ago? All of us have heard the story Brix told. This is the child of Brix and Shira. Brash, a blending of the names. That was more common centuries ago. She picked the book up and set it on one half of a wooden box that was divided into 2 pieces. In the second half of the box, she grabbed a stack of parchment and set it inside. This will take a few minutes. She stared at the box, her brows furrowed. What are you going to do? This fascinated me. The magic of the library was interesting enough, but I hadn't seen Cleo use much magic. I am from the realm of order. I had assumed she was a spirit creature, but then what did I know? This allows me to see all the text and pattern. Then I duplicate it on the paper here. It is not permanent, as the ink is prone to fading, but it will last a year or 2. And if it is damaged, the original isn't affected. As she talked, I could see the pages rustling slightly. I reviewed in my head how pattern and replicate worked, and if she merged create pattern with it. This didn't seem impossible to do, other than my mind trailed off. Doesn't that mean you have to have the entire book in your mind to duplicate it? Yes, I have to pour the full content of it into my mind, then rebuild it. It is not difficult, only requires mental effort, control, and minimal offering. The library helps to a great extent. A minute later, the copy of my book lay there, and she handed it to me. Here you go. Let me know if you need anything else. I shook my head, a bit shocked, and headed home. I dropped the book off in my study and headed to the store. By the time I was done, the cart was full of electrolyte replacement drink, prenatal vitamins, protein bars, and frozen smoothie mixes. I got home and put it all away. I really needed to raise my calorie content by a lot. Already, I'd lost weight that I didn't need to lose. Wishing I dared change into leggings and a t-shirt, I made myself a high-protein and caloric smoothie. Arguing with government officials had burned off the calories I'd eaten at breakfast. With a sigh, I curled up in my study to start to read while sipping on the smoothie. I'd gotten to the end of the first chapter, which explained his life and gave me a different view of Brix and Shira, when the blasted phone rang. If I could have sent lasers out of my eyes, the phone would have been a melted slag. Yes. My voice wasn't curt, but it sure wasn't friendly. Level 5 in Northern California, Yolanda said, not even bothering with any small talk. Near something called the Stutter Buttes. Tentacles and large creatures coming out. 3 dead. Team on the way, but you can get there and shut it. They'll deal with the creatures if needed. I was up and moving, grabbing my bag and taking the minute to get Caroline into his harness. I need a more specific location. Where near the buttes? Which side? I snapped out as I drained the smoothie. I'd be trying the new method the mage had suggested. Hair and a touch of blood. My hand brushed against the pocket I kept scalpels in. They were there, waiting for me. South side near the base of the foothills. They sent me a picture. It is obvious enough that if you're in the vicinity, you should be able to see it easily. Her voice was calm and professional. That I could handle. Got it. I hung up and looked at Caroline. You know where that is? He and I had hiked in most of the mountains in the U.S. Someday we were hoping for the Alps and Himalayas, but it wouldn't be now.
I believe so, but I may need to open multiple rips from the crossroads and see if we are close.
Go. I set the cup down on the desk and stepped through the rip he'd created to the gray, barren pocket realm he called the crossroads. He sealed it behind us, and then he sat there, tail swishing back and forth as he opened a rip. California, he knew relatively well. He'd gotten better at finding places over the years. He hated planes that much, and hated me being on them just as much. I knew he'd been exploring across the country when I was busy with other stuff, and right at that moment, I wanted to hug him in gratitude. Otherwise, this would be much more difficult.
I have it.
The rip widened, and he leapt through it. I followed and halted, looking at the gash across the mountains. The Buttes were a tiny mountain range in the middle of California between the coastal range and the Sierra Nevada. Normally, they were rounded mounds that weren't overly impressive when compared to the mountains on either side. They were beige-colored with rocks and trees. Nothing exciting. That wasn't so today. A gash ripped along the base. It was longer than any I'd ever seen, at least a mile long with thin, questioning tentacles flickering out of it. To my mind, it looked like they were tasting, testing things, then pulling back and thinking. There were also creatures slipping out on either side, large, fur-covered, but they resembled bison more than any predator I'd seen. Do you know what those are? I was already digging out the scalpel and pulling up my shirt.
Baitualas. They aren't particularly dangerous, but they are omnivores like your bears, just with hooves and horns. They don't have a fear response, as even cats struggle to take them down. Their inherent magic is all armor and solidity. The biggest problem is their shit.
Huh? That distracted me for a minute, and the scalpel slipped, making a much deeper cut than I'd intended. I hissed in pain, ignoring his snarl.
Do not do that.
Worry and frustration laced his tone, and if I could, I would have petted him and assured him it was okay. I know. Go on. They're shit? I reached for air and started slamming lightning into the tentacles. His tail lashed, and he glared at me.
It is toxic and can be foul water and soil. They are roamers because they poison the land behind them. Most caretakers kill them as soon as they arrive. Their flesh is sweet, but their organs are toxic to most creatures, which means they are hunted to extinction as they should be.
I swear I'll never understand some of the creatures magic creates. He didn't answer, just watched. I focused on the rip, trying to pull it closed as soon as I chased most of the tentacles back. Most of these rips were stubborn, and I had to fight to get them closed. This one wasn't as bad as most. The problem was its length. Up until now, I think the biggest one had been a few 100 feet. This was a mile. I'd get part of it closed, the tentacles would come back. I'd have to stop and slam them with lightning to get them to go back, while their pressure would undo some of what I had done. It felt like the phrase 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because that was what it was. It took me over an hour. Caroline stayed with me, watching the Baitulas. They were content to graze where they were right now, which meant at least they weren't moving away. From my quick view, I didn't see any running water, but I need to remember to call in a hazmat team to deal with their shit. I was too tired to even think at this point. All I could focus on was my task. The rip was almost closed when Caroline warned me mages were coming. My head nodded as I fought. All the blood at this point I'd given up, and just used up the rest of my hair, leaving my skull shiny, naked, and cold. I only had about 10 feet left when they arrived. "Hey, we're here from Yuba College. How can we help?" A young man who seemed way too excited asked. "1 second," I muttered and twisted my arm, getting a bit more blood out as I sealed the rip. My knees buckled, and I slumped to the ground. Maybe I should start bringing a camp chair with me.
Lady, you okay?
No, but I'll live. I focused on him, but once again exhaustion battered at me. Magic took genetic offerings, but using it, directing it the way I was, took my own energy, and I felt like I'd run a marathon. Okay, see the big beasties? They're like bison, but their shit is toxic. Round them up, slaughter them, or get another mage to open a rip into chaos. Though, killing them might be kinder. Then get a hazmat team here to collect all their shit. It can kill the local flora and fauna, and we don't want that. Ooh, new biologicals. I bet the biology department would love to take a look at them. Someone else said. I craned my head a bit to see a few other people there, but I didn't even care enough to do more than register multiples. Fine, just be aware their internal organs might be toxic, poisonous, something like that. You have the rest of this? I knew to get home. I had to stand. Nothing had ever seemed so daunting, but I didn't have a choice. I had to stand.
Yep, thanks, ma'am. We'll take it from here.
One of the youngsters spoke, and it amused me that I was thinking of them as young. When had I gotten old? I forced myself to my feet, wobbling a bit as I stood there. Caroline, would you? He glared at me, but opened a rip to home, and I stumbled through it to lean against the wall. This looked like a good place to fall.
What I wouldn't give for a human musculature and skeletal structure right now.
His voice came to me as a mutter, something I wasn't really supposed to hear. I just held onto the wall, preventing myself from sliding down it only by the knowledge that I would have to stand back up or crawl somewhere stopping me. That sounded much more difficult.
Hamadia, could you assist, please?
His voice this time was more soothing and less annoyed.
She's not doing well.
Hamadia stood next to me, a puzzled look on her face.
This is not healthy for mortals. No, it is not.
Caroline agreed.
Would you assist me in getting her into bed and making some food? Carrying trays is not my forte.
Of course. Come on.
Strong wooden arms slipped underneath me and lifted me easily.
Though I am not sure of this new hairstyle. I think you looked better with it longer.
I found the strength to run my hand over my now bald pate. She was right. I liked it better long. There had to be some stocking caps somewhere. The random thoughts continued as she carried me up the stairs with surprising smoothness and put me on the bed. My shoes were removed before she moved me back into the bed to sleep.
We will bring food and liquid. You will drink,
Caroline ordered. I nodded and closed my eyes, letting my mind slip away. Chapter 15. Senator Heather Perry's meteoric rise seems to be crashing. Without any explanation, the senator has been removed from 2 committees, and even her own party is refusing to work with her. The only public comment from her office has been, she is choosing to focus on her constituents at this time. However, there have been various notices on House boards about her efforts to force mages into something much closer to slavery than draft service. CNN. I kept changing the ringtone on the phone. I needed to find a piece of music I hated and make it the ringtone, a piece that was rarely played. Already I was developing a traumatic response to the phone jangling. It had been 4 weeks, and I'd gone out 5 times. All of them required everything I could come up with. My periods saved me at least one of the times, stripping my uterus for some powerful offerings. Magic seemed to delight in any offering that related to fertility. I rarely talked to anyone anymore, and if I wasn't out dealing with closing tears, I was sleeping or eating. I'd lost another 15 pounds. Weight I needed, but I couldn't eat enough to put it back on. My nails were gone to the quick, feet and hands, and I didn't have many fat stores left. My skin was shining and bright red as I had offered up the external layer of dermis more than once. I was curled up in bed, shivering, starving, exhausted, and wide awake all the same time. Caroline had curled up around me, his purr interrupted by soft snarls. He wasn't really asleep, just holding me and keeping me warm. Snarls tended to match when I was racked by a whole-body shiver.
"Dinner's ready, Cori,"
Joe said from the doorway.
"You've got visitors."
I lifted my head and nodded. I had stubble, mainly because what was growing back wasn't enough to even begin to offer with. I was wearing a soft green silk cap. It amazed me how cold your neck and ears got when you had no hair. "Anyone I actually want to see?" I asked as I pried myself from bed.
"Actually, yes. So come on, loaded baked potato soup, steamed vegetables, and some fish. And yes, everything is cut up for you."
My hands had been shaking so much lately that the effort of cutting food was almost more than I could handle. The odds were the soup was a calorie-laden, glorious creation that she'd make sure I ate every bit. "Okay, I'll be down in a minute." I rose and went into the bathroom, wanting to pee before I went downstairs. The mirror told me truths I didn't want to see as I washed my hands. The last few weeks of non-stop, either reading, closing rips, or writing reports had done me no favors. I'd never been gorgeous like Joe or Sable, but now I resembled a victim of some horrible disease. My skin had a sallow gray tone to it. There were circles under my eyes. My hair was a stubble grime on my skull, and you could see my collarbones and ribs if I pulled up my shirt. I really looked like I should be in bed with someone waiting on me hand and foot. I laughed to myself as I headed down the stairs. I'd seen cancer patients that looked better than me, but I didn't know what else to do. The book by L. Brash had been fascinating, but while the author had referenced the disappearance of Atlantis and death of his mother, it hadn't felt like someone mourning, more like someone listing off a famous person that had died. Was the family dynamic normal to Phoenix families? Maybe normal to Brick's? Or was there something else? I sighed as I turned toward the dining room. For all I knew, the book had been edited, and that editor had stripped it of emotions. The food smelled good, and I moved in, expecting to see Marisol, or maybe Shay, Sloane, and Scott. I jerked to a stop as Indira and Stephen looked up.
"Fuck me, Cori, what happened?"
The words burst out of Stephen's mouth, while Indira just covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide in horror. I tried to remember the last time he'd seen me. After thinking about it, I realized it would have been when they reactivated me. I hated video calls lately, so I'd been avoiding them. That meant he last saw me when I was about 25 pounds heavier, had hair to my shoulders, and didn't look like a zombie. Hey, just doing my job. I looked around for the kids. They'd been super worried about Mama Cori, and I didn't know what to tell them. Where are the twins? I forced myself to eat dinner with everyone. I was missing too much of their lives, and unless I couldn't move, I was having dinner with them. I sent them to have dinner with Marisol. They took their dragons with them, Sable said with a smile. This is about you. My legs trembled when I let them fold. I needed a day or two of not closing rips. I didn't know how much longer I could go on. Cori, why haven't you used the Wandering Mage Act to stop going and closing rips? Indira sounded pained as she sat on my left. Caroline had moved over the last week, and rather than sitting across from me, was seated next to me, his tail in my lap. Because I can still do it. They said they don't have anyone else. I wanted to cry with exhaustion. Worry still coated the back of my mind that I wouldn't have anything to offer in an emergency. I still have all my toes and fingers. There are still options. Part of me suspected I should be worried about thoughts like that, but that required more energy than I had.
"Cori, you are past what you can do,"
Stephen's voice was gruff as he stared at me. I turned my head to avoid his gaze.
And they are getting better. They have teams in multiple areas that are, at worst, 30 minutes away. Most of the rips aren't so bad that a half hour makes a difference. You need to say no.
And when she tells me fine, she'll order my death? I tried to make it a joke, but the fierceness on every face at the table surprised me.
Tell them to try it. They won't have a government left if they dare. It is supposed to be the stick, not reality. We haven't ordered anyone killed for refusing their assignment while in the draft for years. That isn't the normal flow.
Stephen's voice was thick with anger.
If they try that, I'll destroy the department from the inside out. No one should be offering this much. We need your skills, not your life.
I ducked my head and felt the roughness of Caroline's tongue on the back of my hand. He licked me to heal so often lately, he joked he was becoming a connoisseur of my blood. I'll see. My voice trailed off as I tried to figure out what to say. I noticed more and more that in the moment of fighting the rips, I could think clearly. The rest of the time, I moved in a fog. Even the words I read lately took multiple times to register. I tightened my fist around my fork, using the pain to push away any need to cry.
Cori, if I have to, I'll knock you out. I will. Or worse, I'll ask Esmir to come sit on you.
Joe's voice was harsh.
Have any of them even seen you since it started?
She filled a bowl full of soup and set it in front of me as she talked.
And yes, you are going to eat every bit of that, plus the fish, and I have over a steak in cube form for snacks for you later. And ice cream.
Her voice sounded a bit panicked, and I felt myself shrinking away even more. Sorry, I'll eat more. I brought a spoon of soup to my mouth, concentrating on that action, and it wasn't until I slurped it down that I realized no one was talking. I lifted my head to see Joe and Sable, hands clasped on the table, silent tears on their faces as they watched me. Indira had both hands clasped in front of her, hiding her mouth as she watched me with glittering eyes. Stephen just as silent, but the guilt I saw in his eyes matched mine and not being able to do it all. I need to say no, I said into the silence, stirring the soup quietly.
Yes, unless it is a level 6 and they have 0 mages and people are dying, you need to say no.
Stephen ground out. He sighed and his shoulders dropped a bit more.
The rips are happening more frequently than we can handle. But if you die, we've gotten bigger problems.
Freya, Sable snapped. Caroline, can you ask Esmir to ping me? Both Sable and Joe could respond to mind speak, but neither could initiate it, especially with a denizen that wasn't there.
Yes,
he said, a questioning lilt to the response. A moment later, another voice rang in our minds.
Caroline says there's an issue.
The curious voice of Esmir made me wince. She wasn't modulating as well as normal, and it hurt. Just one more bit of pain. My arm barely hurt anymore when I sliced it. Esmir, can you call Freya and ask her to come to our house immediately? Sable's voice was clipped and forceful as she focused on each word. For me, the mental speech had become almost automatic, but not for them.
There may be a cost involved in it, Esmir warned.
If you want your herald alive in the next week, someone had better pay it. Sable's voice snapped out, and I could feel Esmir's surprise.
Should I come?
If it will help you get Freya here, fine. Sable paused. And besides, you're always welcome, you know that. A slice of pain, and then the giant emerald green cat walked out of the hallway, into the dining room, and froze.
By the void, what has happened? I saw you not 3 weeks ago. You were tired and thin, but not this. What's going on?
All of them launched into explanations, even Caroline adding bits to explain why I looked like the zombie I felt like. I just focused on eating soup. I had no idea what Sable was thinking, and as long as I could eat food and not have to make any decisions, I was going to go with that.
Stupid humans, hissed through my mind. Yes, I will get her. This will have no cost, though I do not know what you think she can do.
Esmir's tail lashed back and forth, a sure sign of her agitation.
I know, but I have an idea, Sable said, her jaw set.
I wanted to protest, but mostly I just stayed silent and kept eating. The rich carb and fat-laden soup tasted delicious. Even though I looked like a starvation victim, I wasn't, so my stomach had no issue with me filling it full of food. Esmir looked at me and hissed. Then she was gone. They all kept looking at me. Then Indira spoke.
What plan do you have?